Chapter 468. What is that? Zheng Luo said the 4 words in 2 sentences. It was obvious that the scene just now had shocked him. It wasn't just Zheng Luo. Everyone else in the cave would not be able to stay calm. When they were in the forest, their first thought was how to kill the beast, how to split it, how to eat it, how to use it, how to exchange its skin for something. The moment they saw this giant beast, even though they couldn't see what it looked like due to the snowstorm, they still felt a sense of crisis as they looked at it from afar. They couldn't fight it. That was Zheng Luo's conclusion. It's a snake, right? Do snakes cry like that? Why would they come out in this weather? The 3 chiefs whispered to each other. Outside, the anaconda beast charged out of the salt mine and landed among the strange rocks around the mine. The snow-filled rocks rumbled. The strange rocks were easily swept away like decorations. A single swipe of its tail would bring down a large patch of rocks. All Xiaoxian and the others could see from inside the cave was rocks being swept up into the sky and thrown far away. Duokong gulped again. He wanted to speak but no words came out. This was the first time he felt this way since he was born. The ferocious beasts in the forest, even the most ferocious beasts he had ever encountered, were simply insignificant compared to the one outside. It could sweep away the hard rocks without a scratch on its body. How could its skin even cut through? The anaconda beast leveled the ground in its path but cleverly avoided the salt mine. All the rocks were swept to the other side, as if it was purposely clearing a path. Xiaoxian even saw people being swept up along with the rocks. However, those people did not have any signs of life, as if they were dead. They were thrown away along with the rocks. Those were the people who had escaped. The chief of the fox tribe had wanted to escape with his men but they could not. The thick layer of snow and the buried rocks were a huge hindrance to them. Even if they wanted to avoid the beast, they could not just ram their heads into rocks. The giant beast was very fast, heading straight for the fox leader and the rest. Hearing the approaching commotion, the woman in the fox leader's arms tugged at him. Go back. They might not be able to escape, but they could take the risk and return. The fox leader frowned. He did not want to take the risk, but the road ahead was blocked by the thick layer of snow. Even breathing became difficult after a while. Even if he got out of the strange rock field, he still had to face the wider salt field, which was even more dangerous. Moreover, he didn't bring any food when he left the cave. The woman tugged at him again and gave him a look. Let's go back that way. The fox chief gritted his teeth and changed his direction. He turned back but not the way he came. Instead, he ran towards the Shun cave. He quickly waved the sword in his hand, sweeping away the thick layer of snow in front of him like a broom. He could also recognize the path ahead. If the sword hit a rock, he would go around it. Seeing this, some people followed him. Along the way, they met the chief of the Shun tribe and other people. Perhaps they all had the same idea and walked in the same direction. Other than them, there were others who returned too. However, they didn't head towards the Shun cave. Instead, they went back the way they came. Although they had missed the direction of the giant beast's sweep, the crisis was not over yet. Previously, when they escaped from the salt cave, they had a hard time avoiding all kinds of rocks. Now, in a large area near the salt mine, there was nothing left except for some traces of rocks on the ground that could easily trip people. There was no thick layer of snow, no irregular rock forest. They turned back quickly. To avoid being targeted by the beast, they did not even dare to look behind them. They did not stop at all, running as fast as they could towards their destination. Hence, the people who escaped from the cave were split into 4 groups. One group still wanted to leave this place and ran further away. Another group was scattered in the rock forest and lost their way, enduring the pressure of the snow and the lack of oxygen. The third group went back the way they came, back to the cave. The fourth group followed the fox chief, heading towards the Shun cave. There were 5 caves in the salt mine, located in 5 different locations. That was why Xiaoxian and the rest had no way of knowing what was going on over there. However, based on the current situation, staying in the caves was indeed the best choice. At least that was the case for now. They had not escaped under the snow, but they could imagine how difficult it was. What do we do? Hearing the rumbling sounds from afar, even the arrogant Lanmu, the mountain wind chief who liked to look down on others, could not help but tremble. He lowered his voice and asked the others. As a chief, he was helpless against such a beast. At the same time, he was relieved that they did not go out. If they did, they might not have been able to escape. The others were silent. The weather change was enough for them. Who knew there was an even bigger problem? This was not something they could deal with easily. If they really fought, they did not know what kind of price they would have to pay. It was possible that they would all be wiped out. They did not know what to do. They had never experienced something like this before. Hence, the three chiefs looked at Xiao Xian again. Up until now, Xiao Xian's decision had been correct. Xiao Xian, any ideas? Asked Zheng Luo. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Send someone down to check. If it's not as cold as before, send a group down. I'll go. Duo Kong volunteered. He just wanted to find something to do. Otherwise, he would feel uncomfortable. This was the first time he felt this way. The beast outside was still clearing the strange rocks. It was probably circling around the salt mine area. Every now and then, it would appear in Xiao Xian's field of vision. Do you guys think it noticed us? Asked the Taihe chief. Zheng Luo and Lan Mu looked at him at the same time but did not say anything. The beast that looked like a giant python did not seem to be in a hurry to come over. Instead, it was slowly clearing the area around it. Xiao Xian, how do you feel? Asked Zheng Luo. Instead of asking the other two chiefs, it was better to ask his own tribe's elder. How do I feel? Xiao Xian thought carefully. I feel that it's in a good mood. The three chiefs were disappointed. No matter whether the beast was in a good mood or not, it was not good for them. Duo Kong had already returned from the lower level. He arranged for some people to go down. The crowded cave was suddenly much more relaxed. The air was much smoother, but it was still cold. Looks like the frost came from that beast. If it comes this way, we have to avoid it, said Duo Kong. After running for a while, his body was not so stiff and he could speak more clearly. Now that he thought it through, so what if he died? He was not lonely with so many people. It was just a pity that he could not see Duo Li get married and have children. Just as Duo Kong finished speaking, he heard Xiao Xian say, "It's coming." The beast outside was heading towards the salt mine. It was neither fast nor slow. It even had the mood to clear the uneven ground. When it swept through the strange stone forest, a layer of snow fell on the place it had swept, so it left a long winding trail behind it. The beast was heading towards Xiao Xian and the others. Seeing the situation outside, they were terrified. They prayed in their hearts. "Don't come here, please don't come here. Go and harm Fox and the others." The beast climbed up the salt mine. As it got closer, Xiao Xian could see it more clearly. The giant beast did indeed look like a snake, but its head was different. It was more angular, and there were also some protruding icicle-like things distributed around its head. As the beast approached, the temperature in the cave dropped. Xiao Xian gestured for everyone to back off. Luckily, he had arranged for some people to go to the lower levels. Otherwise, they would not be able to retreat quickly. After the beast climbed up the salt mine, it passed by the top of the cave. Even without light, Xiao Xian could hear the sound of frost in the cave. Whoosh! The giant beast's scales scraped against the uneven surface of the salt mine, and the sound was clearly transmitted into the cave. It was like a brush covered in ice, sweeping over everyone's heads. Many people shivered and shrunk their necks. When the sound faded away, Xiao Xian took out a glowing crystal wrapped tightly in animal skin to light up the cave. They had already made way for the area directly below the giant beast. At this moment, a large area, from the top to the bottom of the cave, was covered in a layer of frost. There was a herb that someone had dropped on the ground. It was covered in frost and shattered into pieces when stepped on. "That's the king beast." Zheng Luo breathed out slowly. It went to... Xiao Xian listened and recognized it. He pointed in a direction. "That way." "That's the fox cave," said Zheng Luo. "Could the fox have dug it out from the fire crystals?" Duo Kong shuddered. He had dug a hole too. Luckily, it was not deep. They did not know if it was the truth. They could only listen carefully to the sounds and guess what happened. In any case, they would definitely not leave the cave now. At that moment, the fox chief led a group of people to hide in the Shan cave. When they entered, they realized that the bird and fox they did not bring were both here. They even found a corner to hide. On the other side, the people hiding in the salt caves of the fox tribe heard the approaching sounds and their teeth chattered. Frost appeared at the entrance of the cave. There was a freezing sound. The people in the cave rushed into the depths of the cave. With a pung sound, the stone that was blocking the entrance of the cave disappeared in the blink of an eye. A beast head covered in white scales that looked like ice crystals appeared at the entrance of the cave. To a human, the cave was already very big, but to this giant beast it was still one size smaller. The people in the cave heaved a sigh of relief when the beast could not enter. They stood far away, looking nervously at the strange beast head at the entrance. Its eyes were as cold as ice, its pupils as sharp as swords, staring into the cave as if it wanted to freeze the air. It looked into the cave. Then it suddenly opened its mouth and roared. The piercing sound rushed into the cave, bringing with it white frost. It rushed into the depths of the cave. Chapter 469. The inside of the cave was pitch black. In the deepest part of the cave where the fire crystals were dug out, about 10 people were waving their weapons, trying to pry the fire crystals out of the ground. When the incident happened, the Fox and Shun chiefs were in a hurry to escape. They did not have time to take the fire crystals with them. The basket of fire crystals beside them was kicked over. The fire crystals scattered on the ground, frozen by the frost from the pit. There were indeed some who left with the Fox tribe's chief, but there were also some who did not manage to escape. They missed the best chance to escape and stayed in the cave. Some of them felt that staying in the cave was the safest, so they did not follow their chief out of the cave. Now the leader was not here, and the people in the cave were either dead or injured. No one cared about them. According to the people who ran out and came back, there was a huge ferocious beast outside. They could not fight it, so they could only come back and hide. Some people knew about the fire crystals, so they came here trying to pry the fire crystals out of the ground. The fire crystals were very attractive to totemic warriors. For people were digging, one person holding a torch. Not far away, there were about 20 people guarding, preventing others from coming over to take the crystals. Fortunately, the people who escaped into the cave did not rush all the way to the innermost part of the cave. They were worried that the innermost part of the cave was not safe because there was a lot of frost and people who had frozen to death. If it was safe, the two chiefs would not have run out. Beside the fire crystal pit, the person holding the torch felt cold even though he was close to the fire source. The ground around him was covered in white frost. They didn't see what happened here with their own eyes, but they could guess from what they saw. Hurry up! The guard not far away urged them. They felt that the surroundings were too cold. It would be great if they could use the fire crystals. It's just a fire crystal. Why are we taking so long? Someone muttered. Easy for you to say. Do you know how hard the ice is? The swordsmen were panting. They didn't understand why the closer they got to the hole, the harder the ice became. Moreover, the ice here was different from the ice outside. It was too hard. Even though half of the fire crystals were already exposed, it was still difficult to pry them out. The bronze weapons in their hands were not very good. They could only be considered ordinary. They were the kind that the merchants in cities sold in large batches. It was even more difficult to use them. As the swords and sabers slashed down, ice shards splashed onto their faces, necks, and mouths. A warrior shrunk his neck and shook his body. He stuck out his tongue and licked the ice chips that had splashed onto his mouth. Salty, the man said. Nonsense, of course the water in the salt cave is salty. His so cold. Suddenly hearing the noise, a warrior who was guarding not far away asked in a trembling voice, what happened outside the cave? The restlessness of the crowd in the cave made them very uneasy. He could vaguely hear someone shouting, it's outside, it's outside. That giant beast has come in. The people guarding there panicked. No, it can't come in. It definitely can't come in. It wasn't clear whether he was comforting himself or convincing others, but the people in front, before he finished speaking, they heard a roar. At this moment, the people in the upper level of the salt cave seemed to have encountered a strong wind with frost. It blew so hard that they stopped breathing and couldn't open their eyes. It was as if they were in a snowstorm outside the cave. In the lower level of the salt cave, a warrior raised his hand to block the wind. The wind here was not as strong as above. After all, there were many people in the upper level of the cave. They blocked most of the strong wind. Hey, the people in front, what happened? A warrior shouted against the wind. No one responded. Ka ka ka. They seemed to have heard such a sound in their ears. Beside the fire crystal pit, the people who were holding weapons to pry out the fire crystals also stopped. The torches beside them had been extinguished by the wind just now. The heat source disappeared, and the cold was bone-chilling. The warrior who held the extinguished torch quickly hid in a sunken place behind the pit based on his memory. He took out the prepared tools to ignite the fire with his back to the wind. He skillfully identified the gelatinous substance smeared on the end of the ignition stick. Then he took out a flint and rubbed it. Whoosh! The flame ignited on the ignition stick. The fire was not hot enough. He wanted to ignite the torch. The wind became weaker. He should be able to ignite the torch. However, before he could ignite the torch, the fire on the ignition stick went out instantly. Damn it! After cursing, the warrior felt the temperature around him getting lower and lower. He breathed in the air that almost froze his lungs. He whispered to the warriors who were digging for the fire crystals a few steps away, "Do any of you have any fire sticks? I've used up the last one." No one responded. There was dead silence around. The warrior wanted to say something, but he found that his consciousness seemed to have begun to leave this body. He could no longer feel the cold around him. He only felt that his body was heavy and stiff. He could not move until he completely lost consciousness. If there was light, one would find that the warrior was covered with a layer of frost from his face to his feet. A few steps away, the people who were digging for the fire crystals were still holding their weapons. They stood there stiffly without any breath. There were more than 20 guards not far away, but there was no heartbeat. The cracking sounds around continued. The frost covered the entire upper and lower levels of the salt cave. All life stopped. On the other side, in Yinjiao's salt cave, the three chiefs were expressionless. They did not know what expression to show. They had heard the sound just now. They could feel the murderous intent in it. Strangely, the murderous intent was not very strong. It was a gut feeling. Maybe it doesn't care about us at all. It just wants to take revenge on the people who disturbed it? Xiaoxian tried to sound positive. Although he wanted to comfort them, he was not spouting nonsense. Just like when he got lost in the King Stoneworm's cave, the stones around him were changing. He was not too far away from the King Stoneworm. He did not believe that the King Stoneworm did not sense his presence. It was just ignoring it. It was like how people would ignore an ant when walking on the road. Or maybe it's in a good mood today. That's why the murderous intent is not strong? Zheng Luo probed. Xiaoxian had said that the king beast was in a good mood. No matter what, just don't provoke it. Although the king beast's temper was worse than the king stoneworm's, it was still better than the fearsome beasts in the forest. Ignoring it was fine. It was a good thing for them. Suddenly there was a tremor. Then another and another. But each time it was getting further and further away. Xiaoxian hurried to the entrance of the cave. He did not stay for long. The gap in the cave was once again covered by snow. Pushing the snow aside, Xiaoxian looked outside. He saw a snake-like figure in the snow. It moved and crawled on the ground, then jumped up again. It was really lively. When the sound was far away and could no longer be heard, everyone in the cave let out a long sigh of relief. Did it leave? Zheng Luo asked. It should have left for now. I don't know when it will come back. After all, this is its nest, Xiaoxian said. I'll go take a look. I'll go too. Zheng Luo turned to Duo Kong. Keep an eye on the people in the cave. Don't let them run out. Seeing Zheng Luo and Xiaoxian leave, the other two chiefs decided to go take a look too. They wanted to know what was going on outside. Now that the king beast was gone, they had to take this chance. This was a rare opportunity. If they could make it back alive, they might be able to record this experience on a scroll, so that the future generations of the tribe would know that there was such a magical place where a king beast lived. They had been mining salt in this magical place for hundreds of years. At the same time, they could confirm if they could leave this place. Listening carefully, Xiaoxian pushed the boulder aside and hurried out. When the other three chiefs came out, he pushed the boulder back into the cave. It was still windy outside. Snow filled the air. It was much colder than inside the cave. The strange rock field had been flattened and covered in a thick layer of snow. Let's go check out the fox cave, Zheng Luo suggested. The four of them carefully walked in that direction, following the tracks left behind by the giant beast until they reached the fox tribe's salt cave. Wherever the beast had crawled, there was a layer of hard frost. They felt a chill from the soles of their feet. When they saw the state of the fox cave, they felt a little cold was nothing. At least it was better than these unlucky bastards. The entrance to the fox cave was covered in a thick layer of ice. The frost had shrunk the entrance to the cave. There was now a layer of ice almost a meter high at the entrance. They jumped on it and walked into the cave. Zheng Luo held the glowing crystal and had a clear view of the cave. Near the entrance of the cave, there were people frozen under the layer of ice. They should have been trampled here when they were escaping. As they walked further in, they saw some broken pieces. Yes, broken pieces. The frozen people cracked one by one. A chill ran up their spines. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Even the hearts of the 3 leaders trembled violently. Xiao Xian lifted his foot and continued walking. There were a few people blocking the path, all of them standing. Their bodies were intact, but they were all frozen and covered in a layer of white. Passing through the gaps, the 4 of them arrived at the lower level of the cave. They thought the lower level would be better, but it was not. Although there were no other signs of life here, they could not help but feel fear when they saw it for themselves. They were covered in a layer of white frost. They could vaguely make out their expressions and guess what they wanted to do before they were frozen. Fire crystals? As they got closer, Zheng Luo sensed the presence of fire crystals. As soon as they heard the words fire crystals, the other 2 leaders immediately cast aside the fear they felt just now. Seeing the frozen fire crystals on the ground, the 3 chiefs became enthusiastic. The king beast was not here. There were no other living people in the cave and there were fire crystals on the ground. What should they do? Dig. Chapter 470. There were fire crystals on the ground. Half of them had been dug out by the fox people, but now they were all frozen. They had to dig again. However, the 3 chiefs had better tools and were stronger too. With the illumination of the glowing crystals, they dug faster. But they were alert as they dug in case other people came, like the fox and Shin tribesmen. Xiao Xian planned to jump into the pit. They dug for the fire crystals. There was a layer of white ice on the walls of the pit. He tied a rope to the bottom and slid down along the straw rope. The hole was deep and slippery. It was easier to use a rope. After Xiao Xian entered the hole, he landed where the beast used to be. After the beast left, this was a long tunnel. The walls were covered in a layer of white ice. Although it was thin, it was frozen together with the rock. It was very hard. The temperature was so low that Xiao Xian could not even feel the warmth of his breath. He could feel that there were fire crystals all around this tunnel. Perhaps this giant beast stayed in this place because of the fire crystals. Just like the Bat King of the past. However, even after so many years, this snake still hadn't come out. Hibernating for a few hundred years? That was really long. He wondered how big it was. Waving his sword, he cut through the ice and dug out a fire crystal embedded in the wall. Sensing it, Xiao Xian realized that this fire crystal had been absorbed before. It was just not completely absorbed. That snake? Regardless, Xiao Xian sped up and waved the sword in his hand. He didn't need the glowing crystal. With his special vision, he could see the fire crystals on the wall clearly. His attacks were accurate. Zing! Zing! In an instant, the entire tunnel was filled with the sounds of digging, as well as Zheng Luo and the rest digging. After Zheng Luo and the rest had collected all the fire crystals, they even dug out the crystals from the frozen bodies of the fox people and put them all into their own pouches. Only then did the 3 of them jump into the long tunnel below. I was planning to snatch the salt mine from Fox. I didn't expect to snatch their fire crystals instead. The Taiha leader laughed. No matter what, he was able to get the fire crystals. His heavy heart was finally comforted. The fox team had already reached the fire crystal layer. Each crystal was bigger than the ones in Yinjiao's salt cave. The 3 leaders rested for a moment before continuing their operation. No one knew how long the Beast King would be gone. They had to take advantage of the opportunity to dig as much as they could. They would leave when the Beast King returned. I've lived for so long, but I've never seen so many fire crystals. The Taiha tribe's leader's breathing quickened. No one knew if he was tired or happy. I've lived for almost 80 years. But I've never seen so many fire crystals. Lanmu of the Mountain Wind tribe sighed. Xiao Xian paused in his digging. Zheng Luo was silent too. The Taiha leader glanced at Zheng Luo but didn't say anything. The three leaders looked about the same age, around 40 years old. But in reality, they were much older than Zheng Luo. Perhaps others who didn't know the Yanjiao tribes didn't know this, but the Taiha tribe, who had lived with the Yanjiao for a long time, knew that among all the tribes, the Yanjiao had the shortest average lifespan. Xiao Xian only found out later. He had sensed it on the other side of the sea but wasn't sure. He only found out after coming here. The Yanjiao people were different in many ways. But there was one thing that made them different from other tribes. They were like the most ordinary people without any power. That was their lifespan. Among the people from the Taiha tribe who came this time, there were many who were over 100 years old, but they looked like they were still in their prime. However, in the Flaming Horn tribe, those over 100 years old, even if they were still alive, would definitely not be able to hunt. They could only help with farming and couldn't do anything too tiring. At the end of their lives, they would age very quickly, because their lives were incomplete. This was something they didn't expect when the fire seed split. The reason why the ancestors felt so guilty in the notes they left behind was not only because they could not return to their homeland, but more importantly, they felt the punishment brought to them by the splitting of the fire seed. They did not have a complete lifespan. The Flaming Horns were stronger than other tribes in many aspects, but in terms of lifespan, there was a knife hanging over their heads. Before they could finish their journey, their lifespan would be cut off mercilessly. Perhaps the shaman on the other side of the sea knew about this too but didn't tell anyone. Plus, the Yanjiao tribe had always been isolated from the rest of the world, so no one noticed this problem. They didn't feel any negative emotions or pressure. The people here didn't interact much with the outside world either, so most people didn't know. Perhaps some of the warriors knew but kept it to themselves. Back then, the ancestors of the tribe allowed intermarriage with other tribes. Perhaps they wanted to use this opportunity to solve this problem. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The blood of the Flaming Horns was too strong, and the blood of other tribes couldn't suppress it. When Xiao Xian first came here, most of the ancestral notes he read were filled with guilt, but they didn't mention the reason. It was only when Xiao Xian returned to the tribe from Gongjia Mountain and practiced controlling the ancestral bone ornaments that the shaman told him. Many people in the tribe knew their lifespan wasn't as long as other tribes, but they didn't know the reason. Some people thought it was because the Yanjiao people's lifespan was used to increase their strength. They were given divine strength, so they were stripped of other things. Many people felt better when they thought about it this way. The shaman didn't tell them because she didn't want them to have such a slim hope. Generations passed. It had been almost 1,000 years, but they still couldn't go back. They didn't know when it started, but this was selectively forgotten. Only the higher-ups of the tribe knew. Zheng Luo knew, the shaman knew. Others didn't know the real reason. Xiao Xian's arrival was a ray of light, a ray of hope. In the past year, the shaman had sent a few batches of people to the seaside. Xiao Xian had been waiting for an opportunity to move the entire tribe. Unfortunately, they never found the opportunity. No one knew how long it would take for the opportunity to come again. Go back? How? As Xiao Xian pondered, he became absent-minded while digging for the fire crystals. The Mountain Wind Chief was puzzled. What was with the atmosphere? He suddenly felt stifled. I'll take a look around first. Xiao Xian passed the fire crystals to Zheng Luo and ran along the tunnel. As he ran, Xiao Xian identified his bearings and calculated the distance. He stopped at a spot and looked at the top of the tunnel. This should be close to Yanjiao's salt cave. It wasn't directly above, but diagonally above. He didn't start digging immediately. Xiao Xian walked along the tunnel until he reached the end. This was where the king beast had emerged from the ground. But the entrance was already frozen. A very thick layer of ice blocked the entire entrance. The closer he got to the entrance, the colder it got. Xiao Xian didn't walk over. He listened carefully. When he didn't hear the sound of the king beast outside, he turned back. The king beast had frozen the entrance. Probably wasn't going to come back anytime soon. He called Zheng Luo and the others over and told them his plan. He planned to start digging below Yanjiao's salt cave. If they were going to be trapped here for a few more days, would they have to come down from Fox's place every time? The Fox tribe was clearly being targeted by the Beast King. If they went there, they might provoke the Beast King. Besides, most of the Fox and Shun tribe members weren't here. If they came back, a fight would be inevitable. There was no need to waste time with the Fox and Shun tribes. The four of them discussed and decided to do it. It didn't matter where they dug. Xiaoxian quickly waved his sword, using it as a shield to block the shovel. He broke through the ice layer of the tunnel and dug out the rocks on the wall one by one. Zheng Luo and the other two worked harder too. They weren't sure what was going on outside, so they couldn't leave immediately. They might as well get more fire crystals. Even if they had to fight the king beast later, they would protect a portion of the tribesmen back. If they could bring the crystals back, they wouldn't have wasted their time in this weather. The fire crystals they dug out could last the tribe for a long time. They didn't dig a large area, not even a tenth of the size of Fox's, but with the four of them working together, they progressed quickly. In the beginning, the rocks were hard, but the higher they went, the easier it became. In Yinjiao's cave, the warriors guarding the fire crystal pit panicked when they heard the commotion. They hurried to look for Duokong. Duokong sent a portion of the people in the cave up first to prevent the ice from spreading. After that, he brought a few people carefully to the fire crystal pit. They planned to run as soon as they saw the ice. What else was underground other than the king beast? Screech, the sounds from below grew clearer. It didn't sound like the king beast. There was no intimidating aura and no ice. Was it an enemy? Fox tribe or Shin tribe? Duokong grew cautious and inched closer, craning his neck to look into the pit. He signaled for the others to be ready. The other soldiers around him were also gripping their weapons, their facial muscles twitching nervously. They were frightened by the king beast. They didn't want to see anything strange jump out from below. They hoped it was a human, no matter if it was Fox, Shun, or any other tribe. The sounds came closer. The people around the pit were tense. It really didn't sound like a giant beast. There was movement below. Duokong raised his hand. Poof! Rumble! The soil and rocks were pushed aside. Duokong was about to wave his arm and shout, "Attack!" when four heads popped out from below, their faces covered in dirt. He focused his gaze. Yo! 3 chiefs and an elder jumped out of the cave. The four of them had worked so hard to dig their way up. When they popped their heads out, they saw a group of people surrounding the pit, all pointing their weapons at them. Chapter 471. Seeing that it was these 4 people who had appeared, Duokong was stunned. He rubbed his eyes in disbelief and looked again. "Chief, why did you come out from below?" Duokong laughed dryly and put away his axe. The others did not dare to fight the 3 chiefs and 1 elder, so they put away their axes just as quickly as Duokong. But they were still confused. Didn't the chief go outside? Why did he come out from below? Duokong found someone to throw a rope, and Xiaoxian and the others climbed out of the hole one by one. Zheng Luo explained the reason briefly and then sat down on a rock not far away, panting. Although they were relatively strong, they had never stopped digging from the tunnel down here. They were also afraid that the king beast would come back if they were too slow. They were so tense that they finally relaxed. Duokang's eyes lit up. That means if we can't leave, we can jump down here every day to dig for fire crystals? That's right. Chief, you rest first. I'll continue digging. Duokong rubbed his hands. The king beast was less afraid now. The fire crystals were more attractive. Don't bring too many people. Be alert. Come back if you notice anything wrong. Don't be greedy. Zheng Luo reminded. Also, clean up the dirt in the tunnel. There was a lot of dirt in the tunnel because of their digging. If the king beast entered the tunnel again, they wondered if it would be angry at the dirt. They shuddered at the thought of the fox's salt cave. It was too tragic. Not a single person on the upper and lower floors could avoid it. Got it. Duokong called a few people over. They put on their equipment and slid down the rope. The other 2 tribes had the same idea. They would not miss this opportunity. They grabbed the rope and slid down too. Xiaoxian, when can we leave? Zheng Luo asked. I don't know. Wait. Xiaoxian took out a rope, planning to do another divination. He wanted to know about the king beast, but the divination failed. After so many times of divination, Xiaoxian had already gained experience. Generally speaking, it was very difficult for him to divine people or beasts that were far more powerful than him. Therefore, after failing once, Xiaoxian tried to divine the weather again. Although there was still no clear conclusion, the results of the divination told Xiaoxian that the weather here would get worse. We'll leave in 2 days, Xiaoxian said. 2 days later? Zheng Luo frowned. Why? It wasn't that he didn't trust Xiaoxian, he just wanted to know the reason. In 2 days the snow should stop temporarily. When it starts again it won't be like this. Xiaoxian told him the results of the divination. The knot did not tell him what would happen in the future, but it did hint that the best time to leave was in 2 days, when the snow would stop. The Taiha and Mountain Wind chiefs took note of Xiaoxian's words. They thought about it and made plans. In the past, the Mountain Wind people did not have a good impression of the Yanjiao tribe. They only thought that they were strong and rude. But now it seemed that the Yanjiao people were not bad, especially that Xiaoxian. Then let's prepare in advance. Tell the people in the cave that we'll leave in 2 days, the Taiha chief said. Since they had decided to leave in 2 days, the matter of digging for fire crystals was even more urgent. After a good rest, the 3 leaders continued to dig in the pit. The people in the salt cave also urged them to hurry up and dig out the salt mine. They only had 2 days, so they had to dig as much as they could. In the past, they had only dug out as much as was needed in the salt cave. They wouldn't dig out too much as it would be useless if there was too much. They wouldn't sell all of it either. What they sold was only a small part of it. That was why they had only dug out 2 levels of the salt cave in the past few hundred years. Fortunately, they had only dug out 2 levels. If they had continued digging, there would be no more salt. If they had dug out fire crystals in advance and provoked the king beast in advance, the people guarding here would have been wiped out long ago. After a few days of idling, the warriors of the 3 tribes felt much better now that they had work to do. They did not have to think too much about it every day. Whether it was the salt from the top of the cave or the bottom of the cave, they brought all the salt with them. This might be their last time here. No one wanted to be arrogant in the territory of a king beast. If they had known, they would have left long ago. Logically speaking, this was Yanjiao's salt cave. The Taiha and Mountain Wind people should not be digging here. But their cave had not been cleared out yet and time was tight. Plus, Zhang Luo felt that this would be their last time digging here. Since they were partners, they might as well dig in the same cave. There was a lot of salt left anyway. If they finished in 2 days, it would be just right. If they came back later, the Taiha and Mountain Wind people would help Yanjiao get another cave. Just like that, some people dug for salt while others dug for fire crystals. The division of labor was divided into different areas. There were people outside the cave observing and guarding. Once they noticed the king beast's movements, they would quickly retreat. The king beast appeared around noon on the 2nd day. It only wandered around for a while before leaving. It did not come to the salt cave. The people who went into the tunnel to dig for fire crystals met Fox's people as they dug. Both sides met in the tunnel and almost clashed swords. Especially Mountain Wind's people, they looked at each other with fire in their eyes. When enemies meet, their eyes were especially red. Just as they were about to fight, someone above warned, "The king beast has appeared." With a whoosh, both sides ran back to their respective caves. The fox people ran towards the fox cave while the other side ran towards the flaming horn cave. After running back for a while, they realized that the king beast was only wandering around. They relaxed and continued digging. But this time they did not meet the fox people again. The Mountain Wind chief, Lanmu, told them to ignore the fox people for now. Revenge must be taken, but the tribe's matters were more important. They did not have much time. "Chief, what do we do?" In the fox cave, a fox warrior asked the silent fox chief with a dark expression. They were hiding in the Shun tribe's salt cave. When they heard the king beast's roar, they knew that things were not going well in their cave. While they were glad, they were also sad. They knew that the situation here was terrible. After the king beast left, they hid for a while before coming back. To their surprise, all they saw was a cave full of ice men. There was no sign of life at all. When they came to the fire crystal pit, they saw traces of people digging. There were also traces in the tunnel below the pit. They walked along the tunnel and heard the sound of digging. When they looked over, they saw people from the 3 tribes. Clearly, the fire crystals that they worked so hard to dig out were all stolen by the 3 tribes in Yanjiao. Why didn't the king beast roar at Yanjiao's cave? A fox warrior complained. But they knew that the fox and Shen tribesmen were the first to provoke the king beast. Especially the miners. Not only did they touch the king beast, they even pried off its scales. Even though it was only a small piece, it was still an affront. Perhaps that was why the king beast went to the cave and roared. killing everyone in the cave. In terms of regret, the one who regretted it the most was the fox chief. They had quarreled with the Shun tribe at the Shun tribe's cave and almost broke off relations with them. The only reason the Shun chief held himself back was because they were not as smart as the fox people. If they wanted to leave this place safely, they had to rely on the fox people. What should they do? No one knew. Since we can't think of anything, why don't we pay attention to the mountain wind? The woman standing next to the fox leader thought for a moment and said, if we fight the king beast head-on, we won't be able to win. Look at the people frozen to death in the cave. But what if we have bait? The fox chief's eyes flashed. You mean we should let them attract the king beast's attention while we escape? That's right. That's a good idea. But I'm not satisfied with those fire crystals. No one was willing to give up those crystals. They were so close. Wouldn't it be a waste if they didn't dig? Hence, the fox and Shan tribesmen discussed again. They decided to dig for the crystals first, then find a chance to trick the Yinjiao people. Then they could escape. It was a good plan, but just as they were digging for fire crystals, the people who were watching the Flaming Horn Cave came to report that the people there had left the cave. Left? There were so many crystals down there. The king beast never left. Why did they leave? The snow has stopped, the wind has stopped too. Maybe they decided to use this chance to leave. The Shun chief hesitated. Should they leave too? But there were so many crystals down there and they hadn't dug out much yet. What they dug out in one day was more than what they had dug for so long. They couldn't bear to leave. Then, let's dig for a few more days? The fox chief suggested, but his mind was racing. Even without the flaming horns as bait, there were still others. Once they dug up the fire crystals, all they had to do was push the others out. Hence, when the 3 Yinjiao tribes left, the fox and Shan tribesmen did not follow. Instead, they continued to dig. The people the fox invited over with salt knew about the existence of the crystals. Even if they were asked to leave now, they wouldn't be willing. Their minds were filled with the crystals. Looking at the people whose minds were filled with the crystals, the fox chief exchanged a look with the woman beside him. The corners of his mouth curled up. People who had lost their minds were the easiest to manipulate. They were the best bait. At this moment, the Yinjiao tribesmen Taiha and Mountain Wind walked out of the cave, heading towards the white ground. The snow on the ground leveled by the king beast was 6 to 7 meters thick. It was taller than the houses they lived in. And now they were struggling to move forward in this snowy land. Will we meet a king beast? Asked Duokong. I don't think so, right? Xiaoxian wasn't sure either. Hopefully they weren't that unlucky. Chapter 472. The snow had stopped, but the layer of snow that was taller than a house was a huge hindrance to the 3 teams. Anyone who walked under the snow would feel uncomfortable. In the end, the 3 chiefs decided to take the risk and walk where the king beast had crawled. The king beast had appeared nearby yesterday and the snow had stopped this morning. The snow was not thick where the king beast had crawled. The snow on the ground was compacted, forming a long U-shaped path. It was much easier to walk on this path. Other than the knee-high snow, there were no other obstacles. They just had to be wary of the king beast. After confirming the direction, if there were any traces of the king beast, they would follow the tracks. If not, they would have to walk under the snow. The Yinjiao people were fine. They were strong and could withstand the pressure. The others had it much harder. There are more traces of the king beast up ahead. Zheng Luo looked ahead. But it's not recent. The snow is knee-high. It's been here for a while. As long as there was snow, it meant that the king beast had not come here in a short time. This was good news. Hurry up, don't stop, Zheng Luo said to the team behind him. It would take at least 3 days to get out of this salt field. Too many things could happen in 3 days. In the past, they only needed to walk for 2 days and rest at night. Now, even if they rushed through the night, it would be difficult to get out in 2 days. They took the risk and chose to walk where the king beast had crawled. First, the snow was not thick. Second, there were no salt flowers. They did not have to worry about running into poisonous salt flowers. The Mountain Wind tribesmen could finally play their role. The snow here was too thick and too high, completely blocking their vision, so they couldn't see if there was any danger around them. However, the Mountain Wind tribesmen had their wings. Although they couldn't fly very high or fly continuously, It was enough for them to see the situation from above. It's safe. Keep going. Lanmu, the chief of the Mountain Wind tribe, spoke with a lot more confidence. From the beginning until now, the Mountain Wind people rarely had the chance to show their existence. Before, the Yinjiao people always felt inferior to them. Now they could finally hold their heads high. Hearing that there were no beast kings around, the team was relieved. Their footsteps became lighter. They didn't want to face a beast king, even if it was difficult to pass through the knee-deep snow. Xiaoxian's heart skipped a beat as he hurried along. He stopped in his tracks and listened carefully. What's wrong? Zheng Luo quickly stopped. Xiaoxian waited for a while. Finally, he heard 2 consecutive bangs, one high and one low. They seemed to be very far away, and the sound was almost inaudible. However, it also felt very close, as if it was ringing in his ears. Beast King. Didn't he say that he didn't see it around? They were walking on the tracks left by the king beast. The snow was knee-deep, so it wasn't new. There was no sign of it around. I heard that voice again, Xiaoxian said. These words were like a heavy boulder, instantly crushing the 3 leaders' relaxed mood to the point of suffocation. Beast King. Where is it? That's impossible. I flew up and took a look. I didn't see a Beast King. The chief of the Mountain Wind tribe said. Bang bang. Bang bang. The sound came faster and faster, just like when the giant beast woke up in the salt cave. Xiaoxian looked to the side. There was a tall white wall of snow. The others followed Xiaoxian's gaze. Crack rumble. It sounded like ice cracking with the sound of chunks rolling down. The ground beneath their feet was shaking. The tall wall of snow in front of them was shaking and crumbling. Whoosh! A giant white beast's head emerged from the ground, breaking through the snow. It shook off the snow on its head, revealing a face that looked like it was covered in ice. It was the king beast. It had burrowed underground. No wonder they couldn't see it from above. It was underground. At this time, should he run for his life? Or pretend to be dead? They didn't know the habits of this creature. They didn't know how to deal with it. What should they do? Everyone in the group, including the 3 chiefs, felt a sense of despair. When they were in the salt cave, they didn't have such a strong feeling. Even when the giant beast crawled over their heads, it wasn't as strong as when they were looking at it. Most of the giant beast's body was still underground. It raised its head and the front part of its body, looking at Xiaoxian and the group. Puff! The giant beast breathed out white mist from its 2 nostrils. The surrounding temperature dropped instantly. This was just the giant beast's breath. If it roared at the group, the consequences would be unimaginable. The giant beast's gaze swept from the front of the group to the back of the group like frost. Everyone was as stiff as ice. Their blood seemed to be frozen, and they even forgot to breathe. Turning their heads with difficulty, the team members looked at their leader, waiting for his decision. If the leader told them to run, they would run for their lives. If the leader told them to fight, they would also fight. Then, they would let the people with the fire crystals and the salt mine leave. The 3 chiefs also had a difficult choice. One mistake and they would suffer heavy casualties. This was the helplessness of the disparity in strength. Run. Wouldn't it backfire on him? After all, some ferocious beasts like to chase running living things. Maybe they would be ignored by standing still? Don't run. But what if it roars at us? Will we all freeze to death? At this time, the 3 chiefs unconsciously looked at Xiaoxian. It wasn't just the 3 chiefs. After the giant beast scanned the entire team, it looked at Xiaoxian and even approached him. Xiaoxian felt that his hands and feet were cold. This was the first time he was so close to a beast king. Who knew if the beast king would get angry and freeze them all to death? When the giant beast's head approached, the people around stepped back except for Xiaoxian. He felt that retreating was useless. Besides, the giant beast's target seemed to be him. The giant beast lowered its head and approached Xiaoxian. It didn't stop until it was less than 10 meters away. The difference in size made Xiaoxian feel that he couldn't even block the giant beast's nostrils. In the frosty eyes, Xiaoxian could see the snowflake-like lines in the iris of the giant beast. Its sword-like pupils contracted very slightly, as if its owner was thinking, deciding something. Its emotions were not strong. The giant beast exhaled again. White mist hit him in the face. Xiao Xian felt a prickling pain on his face. A layer of frost had formed on his skin. In just one breath, Xiao Xian felt like he had been thrown into a freezer. Xiao Xian! Zheng Luo was about to rush over in shock when he saw the totemic patterns on Xiao Xian's body. Xiao Xian urged the totemic power in his body, trying his best to resist the oncoming frost. The clash of ice and fire was very clear on Xiao Xian's body. Xiao Xian's body was covered in white frost. The red flame split it apart and spread to the totemic patterns on his body, driving the frost away. The invading frost was being forced out by the totemic power in his body. Xiao Xian could only hope that the giant beast would not roar at them. The roar was not an attack on the same level. He could block the beast's breath, but he could not block its roar. If it was that easy to block, everyone in the fox cave would not have been frozen in place. This was the difference in power. He tried to calm his aura so as not to provoke the beast. Xiao Xian stared into the giant beast's eyes. Although its eyes were cold and emotionless, they reflected some emotions. Xiao Xian could react according to the changes in its eyes. Very soon, the giant beast's vertical pupils dilated and contracted slightly. The beast retracted its head and raised its upper body slightly, but its eyes were still fixed on Xiao Xian. Following the giant beast's movements, its head was covered with a few special long diamond-shaped scales. The front end was slightly raised, and icicles were quickly formed, making it look like it was wearing a scarf made of icicles. This was actually a signal to attack. Run! Xiao Xian roared. The surrounding temperature dropped rapidly. The knee-high snow layer was like a swamp, trapping everyone there and severely restricting their movements. Even if they wanted to run for their lives, the reality was that they didn't have the time to escape the attack range. Too slow. They were not even a tenth of their usual speed in the mountains. How could they escape? As Zheng Luo ran, he caught a glimpse of Xiao Xian still standing there. He wanted to pull Xiao Xian away, but before he could, the giant beast opened its mouth. A gust of wind stronger than a storm rushed towards Xiao Xian, freezing everything in its path. It was over. That was what Zheng Luo had thought. In that moment, Zheng Luo was filled with regret. If he had been one step earlier, would he have been able to drag Xiao Xian away? No one could stop the beast's roar. Scenes from the fox's cave flashed through Zheng Luo's mind. The people frozen there, the pieces of frozen flesh. Boom! The loud sound was like an explosion. It sent Zheng Luo flying. Those who didn't run far were also sent flying. The tall layers of snow on both sides were lifted from the ground and thrown far away. They split into smaller pieces in the air and scattered into the surroundings. On the white snowy ground, the giant ice beast stood there like the absolute king of this frozen land, looking down at the tiny people on the ground. In front of it, a burst of flames shot up. The rolling flames dispersed due to the impact of the cold air, but they quickly gathered back and converged, gradually forming a blurry human figure. Between the boundless heaven and earth, in this frozen world covered in white snow, the only color of fire stood opposite the white giant beast. Chapter 473. The once quiet land of ice and snow suddenly became violent. The collision of the two forces sent shockwaves through the air, and the frozen ground under their feet seemed to wail. Xiao Xian held the bone ornament in one hand, while the other hand was clenched tightly. There was a fire crystal in his palm. With his current strength, even if he was a senior totemic warrior, one of the strongest in the tribe, he was nothing in front of a king beast. He would be easily killed in one blow. No one wanted to meet a king beast here, but that didn't mean they could run away. If they couldn't, they could only brace themselves and face it head-on. The only thing Xiao Xian could use was his ancestors' power. This was the only way to save his life. It was just a possibility. If it didn't work, not just Xiao Xian, even the 3 troops here, almost 3,000 warriors, less than 1% of them would survive. Totemic tattoos covered Xiao Xian's rapidly expanding muscles like lava. Even the tips of his fingers were covered in totemic tattoos. Because of the totemic tattoos, Xiao Xian's face was no longer recognizable. Only his eyes were staring diagonally upwards. The frosty airflow rushed over, and the air seemed to be pierced by a sharp spear, making a sharp sound one after another. The white blast from the beast's mouth was mixed with frost and endless coldness. It enveloped Xiao Xian completely. If it wasn't for the bone ornament's flame, Xiaoxian would have been frozen and exploded. Just like those people at the entrance of the fox salt cave, their organs and blood were frozen. Not a drop of blood flowed out, and they couldn't even feel pain. Under such circumstances, Xiaoxian could only barely see a gigantic shadow through the white frost. The sharp sound of the cold air surging in his ears was like thousands of knives continuously sweeping across, mercilessly wiping out everything it touched. It did not give him a chance to breathe. The totemic power in his body, as well as the power of inheritance, blue and red energy, seemed to be screaming and roaring. The blue flood rushed out of the totemic flames, out of the outer shell of the totemic flames, and gathered at the bone ornament on his chest. It flowed rapidly, forming a whirlpool in his chest. It kept sucking in the blue flood, and then passed it on to the 4 bone ornaments outside. The red totemic power flowed through his veins, blood, bones and muscles, and into every part of his body. It kept the cold from seeping in, and supported his body so that he could continue to borrow the power of the bone ornament. Outside, the 2 sides were facing each other. Inside his body, blood was also roaring. The 2 sides were fighting at the same time. The white frosty air released by the beast was mainly targeted at Xiaoxian. It did not care about anyone else, so Xiaoxian took the brunt of the attack. The blast of air carried a little bit of residual energy as it spread outwards, blowing everything around it away. The ground beneath his feet was trembling, as if it could not withstand such power. Under the frost storm, although the flame giant would occasionally disperse, it would quickly gather again and continue to resist the beast's attack. The flying frosty air scraped the ground around Xiaoxian, making ear-piercing screeches. Sweat kept dripping down, soaking Xiaoxian's animal skin clothes. Xiaoxian did not know how long he could last, but being able to hold on was already a blessing in disguise. It just happened too suddenly, and he did not know if the others could escape in time. If they were affected, they would not be in a good state either. At this time, Xiaoxian could not care about the others. What he needed to do was to block the beast's attack as much as possible. If he could not hold on, then he could only die here. Whoosh, the rapidly flowing waves of air suddenly stopped, and the white cold current that enveloped the entire area instantly disappeared. The flames that were about to disperse from the impact gathered together, making the outline of the flame giant even clearer. The beast's open mouth was slightly closed, and its snow-striped eyes were filled with doubt. Its long and narrow pupils widened slightly, moving slowly. It probably did not expect that the person in front of it could block its attack. The thick layer of snow on the ground had long disappeared, and there was no one else nearby. Xiaoxian was anxious, but he could not afford to lose his composure at this critical moment. He calmed himself down and stared at the beast. Was it going to launch another ice attack? Or was it going to use brute force with a sweep of its tail? If that was the case, Xiaoxian would not be able to block it. Even though he was much more familiar with controlling the bone ornaments, his agility was greatly affected after using them so intensely. There was no way he could dodge the Beast King's attack. The only thing that made Xiaoxian feel a little relieved was that the Beast King did not show any real killing intent. It was more like a test and a warning. Compared to the roar in the fox cave, this Beast King was a little calmer. The giant white beast closed its mouth and exhaled a cloud of white mist from its 2 large nostrils. It raised its head and leaned back slightly. A part of its body was pulled out from the ground, making it look even taller. The flames around Xiaoxian slowly subsided, and the flame giant disappeared. Only a few flames were still flickering on the surface of its body. This was Xiaoxian trying to conserve his energy. The sudden high-intensity confrontation had used up a lot of his energy. He could not continue like that. He had to slow down and wait for the Beast King's reaction. The giant beast stared at Xiaoxian, its tail forcibly breaking through the ice and lifting up. Xiaoxian's heart skipped a beat. Was the beast really going to use force? Bang! The beast slammed its tail on the ground, causing the ground to shake violently. The sound traveled across the white ice field and into the distance. In the fox's cave, the fox leader had come out to listen carefully after receiving his subordinate's report. He had heard the roar of a giant beast. Although it was far away and those with poor hearing might not have heard it, it was undoubtedly the roar of a giant beast. He was overjoyed. That was the direction the 3 tribes from Yanjiao had gone. They must have encountered the beast. Serves them right. It would be best if they were all eaten by the beast. Now that he heard the roar, the fox chief was even happier. He returned to the cave. Take over Yanjiao's cave. They won't be able to come back. Even if they do chase them out, they must have suffered heavy casualties. On the other side, Xiaoxian watched as the beast slammed its tail on the ground again and again. Then it roared again. But this time it was not as close as before. After blocking the second attack, Xiaoxian was exhausted. A third attack of the same level would be too much for him. However, what did this giant beast's action seem to be trying to express? The murderous intent in its eyes was not strong, but more of a threat. Chase them out? Warn them? Don't worry, we'll leave immediately. After a pause, Xiaoxian added, we won't come back again. Xiaoxian did not know if the white beast could understand him. But after he spoke, the beast stopped slamming its tail on the ground. Screech, there was a soft sound not far away. It was not within the range of the blast. Although a layer of snow had been blown away, there was still a layer of snow about half a meter high on the ground. Following the sound, a red crystal pillar broke through the snow. There were many branches around it like coral. The salt flower had bloomed. He didn't know if it was because of the weather or because of the snow, but the salt flowers were still expanding. They didn't look like flowers that bloomed on the ground, but more like trees that grew on the salt ground. After the salt flower broke through the snow, the beast that had been staring at Xiaoxian ignored him. It crawled towards the flower, lowered its head, and bit down on the flower that had stopped growing. It pulled it out of the ground and swallowed it. There was the sound of glass shattering or ice breaking. Crunch, 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 crunch. The crunching sounds were very clear. Some bits fell on the snow. After the beast swallowed the salt flower, it swallowed all the bits of snow that had splashed onto it. Xiaoxian watched all this with wide eyes. This giant beast was actually a vegetarian. No, to be exact, it ate salt. The salt flower that others saw as poisonous was an incomparably delicious food to it. It was no wonder that the beast was not angry about the salt mine in the salt cave. To it, the salt in the salt mine was not very attractive. From the moment it woke up, Xiaoxian had not seen it eat the salt in the salt mine. But on this salt ground, the salt flower that people feared had become a delicious meal. As for the rest, it probably did not care and completely ignored them. Just like the other creatures that lived in the King Stoneworm's wormhole. As long as they did not touch the king's interests, they were ignored. The king allowed them to live lowly. After eating the salt flower, leaving not even a scrap, the beast turned around and left. From time to time, it lowered its head and arched its head in the thick snow, as if it was sniffing. Before leaving, the beast roared at Xiaoxian again and slammed its tail a few times. Xiaoxian used the last of his strength to block the third wave of frost attack. Fortunately, the two sides were farther away this time, so it was not as strong as the previous two times. Otherwise, Xiaoxian would not have been able to block it. We're leaving now, Xiaoxian shouted. After the beast left, Xiaoxian moved his stiff body. His muscles seemed to have hardened and his bones seemed to have rusted. Every time he moved, he could hear a creaking sound. It was extremely difficult to move. He loosened his clenched fist, and the remaining white powder fell from his palm. The fire crystal in his hand had been absorbed. His legs were weak. He wanted to move his feet, but his body swayed uncontrollably. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. "Leader, where are you?" Xiaoxian shouted. "Who else is there?" He did not hear a reply. After a while, when Xiaoxian struggled to get up, he heard a muffled voice. It was Duokong. When he got up from the snow, Duokong was still in a daze. He did not brush off the snow on his body. Instead, he stared blankly at Xiaoxian. "Xiaoxian." Duokong seemed to be in disbelief. "It's me," Xiaoxian, who was still sitting on the cold ground, answered. "You're still alive?" "Yes, I'm still alive." "Where's the king, King Beast?" "It's gone." "It's gone? That's good, that's good." Duokong tripped on the uneven ground. He lay on the ground and breathed heavily. He felt the joy and confusion of surviving a disaster. He did not continue to ask Xiaoxian what happened. He got up and wanted to find the others. Chapter 474. The snow around Xiaoxian was blown away. especially the spot where Xiaoxian was sitting. It was a salt field. Not a single bit of snow was left. There were marks of varying depths on the ground, radiating outwards. As for the others, many of them were knocked unconscious like Duo Kong. Some hid in the snow, waiting for the danger to pass before coming out. At that time, Xiaoxian's reminder was timely. Although most of them were sent flying and suffered some injuries, not many were seriously injured. Duo Kong and the others who woke up and walked out of the snowfield in the distance. They dragged the others out one by one. If they stayed like this for too long, the unconscious ones would freeze to death. Zheng Luo was the one who was most seriously injured when he went to pull Xiaoxian away. But he was stronger, and Xiaoxian had taken the brunt of the attack. Although he was knocked unconscious and had to be carried by others, it was good that he was still alive. The bodies of the unconscious and those who had died in battle or for other reasons were found one by one. Those who could not be found were found with Xiaoxian's help. Although the snow was thick, Xiaoxian's special vision allowed him to see things within a certain range. This was much more convenient. The severely injured and unconscious were carried by the lightly injured and continued on their way. Xiaoxian told them that the king beast only wanted to chase them away. If it really wanted to kill them, it would have done so already. Although Xiaoxian described the situation simply, the people from Taiha and Mountain Wind did not dare to underestimate this young Yinjiao elder. They clearly felt the power that sent them flying. It was not an ordinary power. Yinjiao was stronger than they thought. Right, Xiaoxian, you said that the king beast ate salt flowers. I remembered something. Do you think that the king beast is the salt beast that the Qilu people were talking about? Asked Zheng Luo, who was being carried by Duo Kong. Salt beast? The others thought about it. They could not remember the totem of the Qilu people. It had been a long time since they had seen the Qilu people who were good at making salt. Ever since the salt lake of the Qilu people had been occupied and absorbed into the city, they had almost lost all traces of the Qilu people in the forest. I remember that the totem of the Qilu people was the kind with thorns, not snakes, said a warrior from the Mountain Wind tribe who recalled the past. That's not thorns. That's ice. Do you remember what the king beast looked like before it was sent flying? Reminded Zheng Luo. Now that I think about it, it does look like it. Because the king beast looked like a snake at first glance, they did not associate it with the salt beast on the totem of the Qilu tribe, which had a long history of salt culture. Didn't the salt beast totem of the Qilu tribe first appear in their salt lake? Later on, the Qilu people learned of the existence of salt and lived around the salt lake. Now that there's not much salt left in the lake, the nobles lost interest and moved on to the newly discovered salt springs, said the Taiha chief. But the salt beast never appeared in the Qilu salt lake again. Instead, we found high-quality salt in the salt mines. Why do you think the first person to discover the salt mines walked into the deadly salt fields? He's not from the Qilu tribe. He wouldn't have the ability to identify salt. Was there really nothing to attract him? Or did he want to commit suicide? Zheng Luo did not believe it. No matter what the truth was, it had been a few hundred years. No one knew the truth. They did not dare to go back and ask the king beast. Did he want to die? Anyway, we can't go to the salt mines anymore, sighed the Mountain Wind chief. If I knew there was a king beast, I wouldn't have gone. The leader of the Taiha tribe still had lingering fears after escaping death. Anyway, they wouldn't come back again. It wasn't like they couldn't survive. Anyway, it's good to be alive. Yeah, it's good to be alive. It was already a blessing that so many of them survived. Salt and fire crystals were secondary. The only thing the tribe wanted was to survive. I almost forgot. Are the Fox and Shen people still at the salt mines? Asked Duo Kong. The king beast had already warned them once. If it found anyone else, would it go berserk? Even if it roared a few times like this, there would not be another Xiaoxian to protect them. When we go back, keep an eye on the two tribes. If they come back, wait for the weather to improve before we fight, said the Mountain Wind chief. Speaking of the weather, the joy of surviving the disaster was once again diluted. They wondered how the tribe was doing in the weather. The extreme weather was one in 1,000 years. No one could truly relax. There were traces of the king beast on the salt ground. They did not have to walk in the snow, but most of the time they still had to walk through thick layers of snow. Still, they felt better on the way back. The moment they walked out of the salt flats, Everyone roared to the sky. They had survived the king beast and were about to leave this place where they had lived for hundreds of years. They would leave for good. Perhaps they would never set foot on the salt flats again. The people guarding the mines missed this place. Guarding the mines was passed down from generation to generation. They knew more than others. Wuxia had taken over the position from his father. He walked the path his ancestors walked and did what they did. But when they thought of the king beast, they could only suppress their nostalgia. Their roars echoed across the snowy plains, causing the snow on the trees to fall. What used to be a forest was now covered in a thick layer of snow. However, the snow here was not as thick as the salt flats. The average thickness of the salt flats was about 10 meters. Outside the salt flats, the snow only reached a person's shoulders. Luckily, their heads could still be seen. If they stepped into a hole, they would be completely buried. We've already passed the salt flats. What's there to be afraid of here? Zheng Luo had Duokong put him down. Then he ordered the soldiers to cut down trees to make a wooden palanquin. It was easier to carry him. Those who could not walk would be more comfortable on the palanquin. The Yinjiao people were strong. It was easy for 4 people to carry 10 people. After distributing the injured, Zheng Luo was placed on a simple palanquin. He looked at the vast expanse of white in silence. The forest looked like it was covered with a thick layer of cotton. However, there was much less snow in the forest. This was the benefit of having large and dense trees. It was just that they had to guard against other fierce beasts that were active in the forest. Some beasts were hibernating. Others came out to find food when they were hungry. It was not just the humans. The animals were not used to the change in weather either. On their way back, they saw many beast corpses buried in the snow. There were animals eating around the corpses. Crunching sounds could be heard. The meat was frozen. When they were looking for a place to cook porridge, some brave animals wanted to come over. It was warmer here, but there were too many people, so they did not come over. However, there were a few small animals that looked like squirrels that jumped to the fire. They did not get too close, but they could borrow the heat from the fire. People in the tribe usually did not eat these small animals. They looked down on them. They would only eat them when there was nothing to eat. Therefore, these little creatures were very lucky to be alive and able to borrow the fire from the side. The soldiers who were not seriously injured hunted a few wild animals and 2 fearsome beasts that came out to find food. They roasted the meat and shared it with everyone. After being frozen for so many days, they could still savor the taste of hot food for a long time. Xiao Xian, when will the weather change again? Asked Zheng Luo. Tomorrow morning. This was the result of Xiao Xian's divination. But he could not tell what it would become. We won't rest tonight. Let's continue on our way. Zheng Luo decided. The other 2 chiefs had no objections. They only knew that it was better to follow the Yinjiao people than to decide on their own. It was not easy to travel at night. After all, they could not remember every detail of every place. There were many dangerous places in the forest and they had to cross mountains. One mistake and they could lose their lives. Xiao Xian had recovered a lot. Even the glowing crystals were not as useful as he was now. He led the way. Beside him was Wuxia and his wife. They were most familiar with this place and had been here many times. Xiao Xian would ask them every now and then to confirm the direction before continuing on. The next morning, the first glimmer of light came. It started snowing again. The wind was strong and those who could not stand still would be blown away. Good thing we've already crossed the most dangerous mountain. Wuxia sighed. After leading the way for the whole night, Xiao Xian could take a breather now that someone else was leading the way. The sky was gloomy, even darker than when they were in the salt mines. Thick clouds made the day seem like dusk, gloomy and dark. After 2 days, they finally reached a familiar area. It was not far from the tribe. The mountain wind people had parted ways with them the day before. Thank you for this. If you need help, send someone to let us know. The Taiha chief said when they parted ways with the Yinjiao team. This time, if it weren't for the flaming horns, they might not even be able to return 10 out of the 1,000 people they brought out. Zheng Luo waved his hand and did not speak. He was still being carried. There's a path in front. The soldier leading the way shouted. The so-called path was a path cut through the thick snow. They did not need to move anymore. The tribe made this. And food. Wuxia untied the animal skin bag tied to a wooden pole. The dried meat inside was cold and hard, but it should have been made in the past 2 days. It was good to be back. That was what every soldier thought. Before long they saw people moving around. They were the tribe's patrolling soldiers. Everyone wore thick animal skins, their heads covered so only their eyes could be seen. They shouted happily when they saw the people who had returned. "There will be people guarding here every day to sweep the snow away," the patrolling soldier said. After counting the number of people in the team, the patrol soldiers who came to help felt a little relieved. This was much better than they had imagined. They were all mentally prepared to witness a tragic situation, but they didn't expect that so many people would be able to come back safely. "Chief, how's the salt mine?" a patrolling soldier asked. "We'll talk when we get back." The patrolling soldiers did not ask any more questions. In the 2-meter-high snow, there was a curved path that led to the river in front of the tribe. The river was already frozen, so there was no need for a bridge. They could walk on the thick ice without any problems. Many people in the tribe had already heard the news and came to receive them. Some even handed them hot meat soup. When they returned to the tribe and thought about what they had experienced, the soldiers felt like they were in a nightmare. Luckily they were awake now. Elder Xiaoxian." Someone squeezed through the crowd towards Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian blocked the flying snow and looked. It was the one who took care of the duck shed. "What, did the fat duck cause trouble?" Xiaoxian asked. "No, it hatched. The duck's egg hatched." Chapter 475. The eggs hatched? It had been a long time since the fat duck snatched the eggs. Compared to the eggs in the other nests, these eggs hatched much later. They were from the same nest, but the fat duck snatched the eggs and took a long time to hatch. If this was a coincidence, then there were too many coincidences. But if the fat duck was not efficient at hatching the eggs, that was not the case either. Even if it was an amateur, the eggs would not have hatched so differently. "I'll go take a look." Xiaoxian passed the things he was carrying to Zhongluo and the rest. He pushed through the crowd and followed the person in charge of the duck shed. "It's been snowing too much recently. We've been sweeping the snow at least 3 times a day. When it doesn't stop, we'll even sweep at night." The person leading the way sounded worried. Many ducks have frozen to death this year. The ducks that did not want to go near the tribe had indeed frozen to death. Even the older ducklings were not spared. Many ducks brought their ducklings into the duck shed to seek shelter. Xiaoxian listened to the person in front of him talk about the recent happenings while observing the duck shed. The other duck sheds around him were quiet. Only the occasional duck call could be heard, but it did not sound energetic. When they arrived at the duck shed where the fat duck lived, the person leading the way did not enter. He pointed inside and stood at the door. He could not enter at all. If he pushed the door open, he would be attacked by the fat duck inside. He could only stand at the door and listen. Indeed, there was a young voice coming from inside. Xiaoxian pushed the door open and a murderous aura rushed towards him. To prevent the cold wind from blowing in, Xiaoxian quickly closed the door behind him. He took out a glowing crystal and placed it beside him for light. Seeing that it was Xiaoxian, the fat duck froze. It maintained its attacking posture but did not move. Its eyes darted around as if it did not expect Xiaoxian to come. It was still very wary of Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian looked towards the duck nest. A few green balls of feathers were huddled there. They looked up at the light source but could not see Xiaoxian clearly. They only felt a foreign aura and panicked. But when they sensed the fat duck beside them, they quickly calmed down. Xiaoxian also noticed a small detail. When a duck stood up from its nest, its feet hooked onto a piece of hay. A piece of hay was cut in half. It was the same foot as a fat duck's, but with a sharp hook. Beside the fat duck were some eggs that had not hatched. They were still in the process of hatching. After all, these eggs were hatched at different times and hatched at different times. Xiaoxian counted. There were about 8 green balls of feathers. When he left the tribe for the salt mines, he counted 31 eggs. This meant that there were still 23 eggs that had not hatched. He wondered if all of them would hatch successfully. Thinking about it, Xiaoxian felt that it was strange. None of the ducklings he saw before looked like this fat duck. Xiaoxian wondered if the fat duck's bloodline was too weak. Was that why the other ducklings did not look like it? Or were they cuckolded? But now it seemed that the fat duck had planned this all along. It knew how to pick the eggs from the nest. And the ones it picked out all looked like it. No wonder it did not care about the ducklings outside. Perhaps to it, only the ducklings here that looked like it were its own. It did not care about the others. Look at how tightly it protected these ducklings. Compared to the ones before, it was like heaven and earth. In the natural world, anything that was not its own would be killed, just like a pride of lions. And now, this fat duck was using a similar strategy and attitude. Only those it picked out would be treated well. Everything else was meaningless. Just as he was about to leave, Xiaoxian saw some strange marks on the ground. He took a closer look and realized that they were fish scales. Using his special vision, Xiaoxian scanned the house. In the corner behind the duck nest, there was a thin layer of hay. There were some small fish and fruits under it. This duck was well prepared. After looking around, Xiaoxian came out of the duck shed. How is it? How many did you hatch? The person in charge of the duck shed asked curiously. 8 hatched. The rest are still hatching. What do the ducklings look like? Just like the fat duck. The person in charge of the duck shed was even more curious. Unfortunately, he did not dare to go in. Don't worry. When the snow stops and winter is over, they will naturally come out, said Xiaoxian. After leaving the duck shed, Xiaoxian was called to Zheng Luo's place on the mountain. He had a hot meal and went back to sleep. During this time, no one in the team had a good rest. Xiaoxian only slept for a day. The others slept for 2 days and 2 nights without waking up. On the 3rd day back at the tribe, although it was snowing heavily, the tribe still held a farewell ceremony. They built a barrier around the fire pit and cremated the warriors who had sacrificed themselves. Survival meant endless wars and endless life and death. The people in the tribe had long been used to such farewells. Although their hearts were heavy, it was much better than what they had expected. After the ceremony, Xiaoxian was called for a meeting. This was the first time everyone had gathered for a meeting after returning from the salt flats. After treatment and rest, Zheng Luo's injuries were better and he could walk now. They had already told the shamanists and the higher-ups about what happened at the salt mines. There were happy and sad moments. No one objected to losing the salt mines. Even if they did not see the king beast, they knew that with their current strength they could not fight it. Giving up on the king beast and avoiding conflict was the best choice. Fortunately, they brought back a lot of salt. Most importantly, they brought back fire crystals. This made everyone very excited. With these fire crystals, the tribe's warriors could strengthen and improve their strength, especially those who were at a bottleneck. The fire crystals could solve their problems. The Taiha tribe sent over some herbs. Some were effective for frostbite, some for disease prevention. After all, it was the first time they had encountered such weather. The warriors were more or less not used to it, especially the children, who fell sick easily. The shamanists explained the various arrangements for this snow disaster. It was impossible to leave this place. In this kind of weather, it was impossible to leave. Moreover, they didn't know if other places would be better than here. They could only stay in the tribe and resist the weather. The warriors chopped some firewood and stored it in the house to keep warm. Fortunately, they had a lot of animal hides, so they did not have to worry about shelter. According to the Taiha people, some of the smaller tribes in the forest had already frozen to death. They did not know the details. In this weather, it was impossible to investigate. After everything was settled, the higher-ups discussed Fox and Shun. When winter was over and the snow stopped, they would investigate and see how the people in the salt mines were doing. Mountain Wind wanted to start a war against Fox. They had tried to persuade Zheng Luo and Taiha to join, but Zheng Luo did not agree immediately. It wasn't just the flaming horns. Taiha and Mountain Wind were also thinking about the Fox and Shun tribes who were still at the mines. What was the situation like now? At this moment, a massacre was taking place on the salt flats and snowy plains. The Beast King didn't care if those people were on the same side. It would do whatever it wanted. To it, it was the only one in this white land. It was its territory. All other creatures had to step aside. It had only intended to do what it had done when it encountered the group of people before. It would roar twice, blow a few breaths, and knock its tail as a warning. However, It did not expect that this group of little things would dare to resist and even use force against it. This was a challenge to the king beast. It was enraged. People with animal skin bags full of salt and fire crystals were running for their lives in the thick layer of snow on the salt ground. Those who couldn't escape had already been frozen into ice, or had been sent flying. No one knew where they fell, but no one cared about them. The fox and Shun people were all running for their lives. They thought they would return with their bags full of loot after not seeing the king beast. They did not expect to meet it again. The people who had been used as bait by the fox chief had all been frozen into ice, cracked by the cold wind and scattered among the snow. Without the bait, the people from the two tribes who had not managed to escape were dwindling rapidly. The leader of the fox took his lover and sprinted through the snow. He did not have the time to look at the others. Those who could keep up with him, those who could not could only become a part of the snow. The fox people had split into 3 teams, escaping in 3 different directions. He did not know how the other 2 teams were doing. There were more than 1,200 people from the fox tribe, but now there were only about 300 left. They had not made it out of the salt flats, and there were still the Shun people to share the firepower. Thinking about the losses today, the fox chief's heart bled. Not just the salt and fire crystals, they had lost a lot of people. It was enough to force him to step down. He did not even dare to imagine what would happen when he returned. "It's all the Yanjiao's fault," scolded the woman in the fox chief's arms. Yes, it was all the Yanjiao's fault. If it weren't for the flaming horns, their plan would have been executed on time. Everything would have gone smoothly. The salt caves would have been destroyed and the teams from the other 3 tribes would have suffered from the cold. Then they would have gone to the Shun salt caves and fought with the outsiders. The fox tribe would have just been waiting to pick up the leftovers. The king beast was an accident. However, they had run so far but did not see any Yanjiao or Taiha or mountain wind corpses. Did they all escape? He even purposely chose the path Yanjiao took, but all he saw was a thin layer of snow. Other than that, there were no other traces. No, they must have all been eaten. They must have. Although he was more inclined to believe that the 3 tribes had all left, the fox chief did not want to admit it. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. His eyes were bloodshot. If they could escape this time, he would not let the Yanjiao people go. He would not let them go. Chapter 476. The blizzard continued, even more ferocious than before. Fortunately, compared to the salt flats, the tribe was much calmer. The current blizzard was only a little more ferocious than the previous one. But for the warriors who had experienced the blizzard in the salt flats, it was much easier. Looking at the snow outside, they were very calm. Xiaoxian rested for a few days. After his body had fully recovered, he walked out of the house, braving the cold wind and snow, to the place where the shaman had arranged for him to train. Because there were not many people living here, and the soil was not suitable for farming, most of the time it was empty and became a playground for the children. Even if Xiaoxian had been training before, he would spare a few days for the younger generation of the tribe to practice their throwing and chopping. But now it was snowing, and even the senior totem warriors were unwilling to come out, not to mention the younger generation who were not strong enough. In such a large area, there was only Xiaoxian. Because no one came here in order to save manpower, the snow was not cleared. Therefore, the snow here was much thicker than in the densely populated areas. It was already taller than Xiaoxian's height. Now the snow was still falling, and the snow was still piling up. Xiaoxian followed the path cleared by the tribal warriors to the end of the road. Looking at the white snow wall in front of him, he took a deep breath. The totem power in his body was running, but it was not as crazy as before. There were no opponents or enemies here, so he did not need to deal with it in such an intense way. He also did not need to bear the totem power and the power of inheritance. There was no hurry, he could take it slow. The totem power was running all over his body, and the power of inheritance was separated from the totem flame and gathered in the totem bone ornament on his chest. Just like the previous times when he borrowed the power of the ancestors, the difference was that this time it was more gentle. The previous practice was just to familiarize himself, but now it was to control it more precisely. There was no need to be intense, he just needed to do every detail according to his will, and not lose control. Whoosh, the flame came out of the bone ornament, gradually expanding until it wrapped Xiaoxian's whole body. The totemic power in his body drove the airflow that overflowed from his pores. It intertwined with the whistling of the wind outside, making a whining sound. As the wind became more intense, the sound became louder. The thin layer of snow that had accumulated on the ground beneath his feet seemed to have been swept away, leaving only a round, earth-colored ground. Half an arm's length away from Xiaoxian, there was a 3-meter-high layer of snow in front of him. However, the thick layer of snow was sinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. The snow wall closest to Xiaoxian seemed to be pushed away from Xiaoxian by an invisible hand. In the midst of the white snow, Xiaoxian, who was wrapped in a layer of red flames, slowly lifted a foot and took a step forward. Boom! His foot landed on the ground like the hooves of a giant beast in the forest. There was a rumbling sound and the ground shook. The force of this stomp on the ground created air currents and shockwaves, causing the originally dented snow wall in front of him to quickly expand, the arc increasing in size. Chunks of white snow were lifted from the large snow wall, flying into the distance. A small piece of gravel flew out from the crack in the ground under his feet and shot into the snow wall like a bullet. The first step slowed down for a second step. The second step was the same as the first. There was a loud rumble when he stepped on the ground. The layer of snow continued to be pushed back by the force of his step. Chunks of snow flew into the air. A bigger gap appeared on the snow wall as it moved further away from him. The effect of these two steps couldn't compare to the time he sent the Linlu chief flying with one palm in the royal city. It couldn't compare to the force he used against the king beast either. It couldn't even compare to the 2 steps he used at Gongjia Mountain. Although the sound was loud, it was nothing compared to the previous few times. The force was still strong but much gentler. It wasn't as intense as before. It was much gentler. This was the result of Xiaoxian's control. He wanted to control them more precisely and master them more skillfully. Instead of wasting them in useless places, he wanted to focus them as much as possible and use them on the target he had set. Not enough, this control wasn't enough. The third step, the fourth step, step by step he took it slowly. The rumbling sound gradually quieted, the ground shaking weaker with each step. The gravel on the ground was no longer sent flying, and the snow on the wall no longer flew. Everything was progressing in a more peaceful direction. Compared to the peaceful movements outside, Xiaoxian's power was circulating more intensely. The totemic power in his body circulated again and again so that his body could sustain the bone ornament's power. His skin changed with the changes. Totemic patterns that were red like molten lava flowed with flames, almost covering Xiaoxian's entire body. Within the totemic flames, blue flames surged like a flood, gathering at his chest. At this moment, Xiaoxian couldn't hear anything from the outside world. There was only the sound of his blood and the thumping of his heart. The air around his body flowed like boiling steam. The humming sound became more rapid. However, it didn't take long for the rapid humming sound to fade. His body was so stiff that he couldn't move when he used the bone ornaments. Now he could take more than one step. His stiff movements became smoother and more natural. His heavy footsteps also became lighter. In the vast expanse of white snow, Xiaoxian was like a red fish, swimming leisurely in the white sea of snow. Zheng Luo looked at Xiaoxian as if he was a monster. No one in the tribe could feel the power of the bone ornaments more deeply than him. When Xiaoxian used the bone ornaments against the king beast, Zheng Luo was the closest. He couldn't dodge in time and was sent flying. He couldn't even walk when he left the salt fields. He had to be carried back by Duo Kong. After recuperating for so long, he could only move his legs a few times. Even running was difficult. But looking at Xiaoxian, he had gone from unleashing his power with every kick and punch to now being restrained and calm. The change was so fast that he could not believe it. How could he release such power so freely? If it was so easy, there wouldn't be only one Xiaoxian in thousands of years. The shamaness wore a thick fur coat, braving the freezing wind and snow. Her eyes were filled with relief. She turned to Zheng Luo. Has everything been arranged? Yes, they left this morning. Zheng Luo was hopeful and worried. I hope they can arrive safely. Let's hope so. The shamaness looked at the conspicuous figure walking down the mountain step by step. She turned to leave with Zheng Luo. Xiaoxian could walk so easily in the snow. One of them was old and the other was injured. They couldn't stay in this environment for too long. After walking for a while, Xiaoxian's body was already sweating. He took a short break to adjust himself before continuing. A 3-meter wide road appeared where Xiaoxian walked. The snow on the road was pushed away, leaving only the earth. However, the falling snow soon covered the ground in a layer of white. Plop plop. The snow wall in front of them became even harder because of the pressure, and it bulged upward in an arc. The further he walked, the harder the snow wall became. It made it harder for Xiaoxian to walk. Every time Xiaoxian took a step, the snow on the wall would squeak and squeak. At the foot of the mountain, the soldiers in charge of patrolling carried shovels and went to rest in the temporary shelter they made. The so-called temporary shelter was, in fact, a narrower side road that they dug next to the road that they had cleared. Then, at the end of the side road, they opened up a square area about 3 meters in length and width. The 20 soldiers who were sweeping the snow were currently huddled in this 3-meter-high shelter. They leaned against the solid snow wall and talked. The cold wind was still blowing. There was wind here too, but the wind was weaker here. It wasn't as cold as before. This damn weather, when will it stop? A soldier complained. Who knows? After I'm done here, I have to go back and clear the roof. Otherwise, the house will collapse. I heard that this is a disaster that happens once in 1,000 years. I don't know how it is in other places. It's more than 1,000 years. I heard that it doesn't happen once in 10,000 years. The patrolling soldiers hid in the temporary shelter and chatted. As they were talking, a soldier sitting against the snow wall suddenly had a large piece of snow fall on his head. Ouch! The soldier quickly brushed the snow off his head. It didn't hurt, but the cold made him feel even colder. The others standing against the wall couldn't help but look up at the snow wall. How could such a large piece of snow fall? Was it blown by the wind? Be careful, more snow is falling. At the edge of the snow wall, pieces of snow bulged and fell outwards as if someone was pushing them. The soldiers near the snow wall quickly moved away. What's that sound? Plop plop, crack crack. The sound was getting clearer. The 20 soldiers forgot to shiver and stared nervously. Crack crack. The snow wall cracked and slid down the mountain. Oh no, run. Some of the soldiers had gone to the mountains further away for hunting. There was snow and ice there all year round. It was said that if you stomped on the ground or shouted at the top of the mountain, you would encounter a torrent of snow rushing down. Could it be that this happened in the tribe? It shouldn't be. The mountain in the tribe wasn't high and the slope wasn't steep. The snow wouldn't slide down. No matter what, it was best to avoid it. The 20 soldiers quickly retreated along the side road. After retreating for a distance, they looked in that direction again. The place where they were originally standing had been replaced by falling snow. And there it looked like a white giant worm was crawling down the mountain, bit by bit. It was quite rhythmic. The patrolling soldiers carried big shovels and looked at everything in front of them in shock. They were still wondering what was going on. They stood there for a long time until they sensed the breath of Xiaoxian. Elder! Elder! Chapter 477. Ever since they knew the consequences of Xiaoxian's training over there, the patrolling warriors' interest was to wait there after they finished sweeping the snow. The side road was still there, so they directly retreated from the temporary resting point and turned it into a shelter. Originally, the patrolling warriors wanted to follow the original method and make an open-air resting point, but that would also cause them to freeze and be blown by the cold wind. One day, Xiaoxian suddenly remembered a method. He taught them to use simple tools and water to make large ice bricks. The water in the river had been frozen thick, so they couldn't go there to break the ice. They could only melt the snow themselves and pour it into the tools. After freezing it for a while, ice bricks would be formed in just a few breaths. It was very efficient. Such ice bricks were quickly accepted by the people in the tribe, and even some warriors who were not on duty came out to help. Now, from the top of the mountain to the bottom, there were many igloos scattered in an I shape. The foundation of the igloos was also made of ice. They were piled high above the snow, and then the houses were built on top of it. The patrolling warriors would go to the igloos to rest and drink some hot water to warm up their bodies. From here they could see the situation further away. The people in the tribe who had been locked up at home would also go for a walk or two out of curiosity. Xiao Xian was also worried that these people would suffer from snow blindness because of facing the snow for a long time, so he reminded them. But until now, no one had suffered from snow blindness. Look, the elder is pushing the snow again. The people lying on the window of the igloos looked outside and said, "Where is it? Let me see." There were 3 small windows, but people rushed to see. These igloos were built close to the first road that Xiao Xian pushed out. Xiao Xian would walk along a new road every day. From a high vantage point, one could see a person wrapped in flames walking slowly on the white snow. And in front of him, there seemed to be a giant white worm moving down the mountain. Apart from the initial shock, the patrolling soldiers now treated this as their daily entertainment. The tribe worshipped the strong. Not to mention the cold they had to endure when walking in the snow in the stormy weather, they had also tried to push the snow. Unfortunately, the seemingly insignificant snow piled up together was exceptionally firm and heavy. They could not push it after piling it up for a while. Usually they thought that they were quite strong. Duokong walked in from outside, patted the snow off his body and asked, "How is the sentry post at the foot of the mountain?" Tao Zheng and the others are continuing today. They said they want to make it a bit higher so that they can see far away from the top. They won't have to go out and suffer from the cold, a warrior said. It's a good thing to use ice bricks as sentry posts, but don't slack off. I'm going to check. Duokong scolded. Yes, I promise I won't slack off. Yes. Duokong nodded and pushed the person by the window aside, looking outside. Let me see how Xiao Xian's pushing snow is going. The warrior standing at the side pursed his lips. Wasn't it just to snatch the window? He even scolded them with a stern face. At the foot of the mountain on the opposite side of the river, tall sentry posts were built. Large ice bricks were continuously sent there. After building a few outposts, the warriors had nothing to do, so they tried to connect the outposts together. They used ice bricks to create a path, so that they wouldn't have to brave the wind and snow when they moved around. Moreover, it looked like they had built a city wall. Looking at the path that was built comparable to a city wall, the patrolling warriors were even more motivated. This kind of snowy weather was not without fun. For those who had nothing to do, it was another kind of experience. The beasts in the forest rarely appeared now. In this kind of weather, it was impossible to go out to hunt. Fortunately, everyone had a lot of food, so they would not starve. If they ate sparingly, they could still survive, as long as this kind of snowy weather did not continue. Many people in the tribe did not know that a team of 50 people was braving the snow and leaving the forest. These people were sent out by the chief and the shamaness. Although they might miss the most important ritual of the year, the shamaness and the chief specially allowed them to be absent. This was because to the shamaness and the chief, this matter was more important than the ritual. It concerned the future of the tribe. The leader was called Xiang Chun. He was slightly younger than Duokong, and was also an advanced totemic warrior. However, in the past year, he had not been in the tribe for most of the time. Xiang Chun was part of the first group to follow Xiao Xian to the seaside. He had walked the road from the tribe to the seaside twice. This was his 3rd time. This time, Xiang Chun was ordered to bring people to the seaside to see the situation there. According to other people's thoughts, why would they go out in such cold weather? However, the shamaness and the chief wanted this kind of weather. The shamaness and the chief even hoped that the cold weather would last as long as it did, as they thought. The path Xiang Chun took was different from the one Xiao Xian took when he first found the tribe. When Xiao Xian first went from the seaside to the tribe, he almost walked in a straight line. However, it was more difficult to walk that way. Later on, the people of the tribe took another route to the seaside. They walked out of the forest with difficulty. When they passed by Amba City, they found that Amba City, which was not too deserted in the past, was now deserted outside the city. There were shadows walking around the towers on the city walls, but no one else could be seen anywhere else. They wanted to find a place to rest in Amba City and exchange for some food. Now, it seemed that this plan was not successful. The city gates were closed, and no one was allowed to enter. Let's continue, Xiang Chun called out to the others. Compared to the forest, there was less snow here. Perhaps in the eyes of the people of Amba City, this was a heavy snow that had not been seen in 1,000 years. Even walking was difficult. However, Xiangqian and the others who walked out of the forest did not think so. The snow here was only waist deep. Every time they met someone on the road and overheard them talking about, the snow is already waist deep, how are we going to survive? Xiangqian and the others couldn't help but say, it's only waist deep and you're already so shocked. If you go into the forest, will your eyeballs fall out of your sockets? Along the way they also encountered robbers, but very few. In this kind of weather, professional robbers were not willing to come out. Those who came out were amateurs. They were forced out by the wind and snow. Due to hunger and cold, their eyes became fierce, and they looked ready to risk everything. Unfortunately, Xiangqian and the others were not merciful people. If they were so soft-hearted, they would not have lived until now. If these robbers only begged and spoke softly, perhaps Xiangqian and the others could give them some food. However, if they stood in front of them with knives, they could not be blamed for being merciless. Fresh blood splattered on the snow and quickly froze with the water. Those who fell there would be lucky to be covered by the snow, but unlucky ones would become the targets of others who were hungry and cold. Along the way, Xiangqian had seen too many. The further they walked, the thinner the snow became. Xiangqian's heart sank. Although he did not like this snow disaster, according to the shamaness and the chief, it might be best if this cold weather continued. Most importantly, had the sea frozen? This was the shamaness' hope. The shamaness said that if the sea froze, they should continue forward. If there was a large patch of ice, this would be an opportunity. They could return to their old haunt after 1,000 years and reunite with the other group. Perhaps the Yinjiao's hidden disease could be cured. Who would not want to live twice as long? They would not have to consider leaving the hunting team after hunting for another 20 or 30 years, and then have to watch people from other tribes who were older than them hunt bravely in the forest. Just thinking about it was miserable. Please don't freeze, please don't. After leaving Amba City, they passed by a smaller city. It was the same as Amba City. The city gates were tightly shut, and there was a solemn and heavy atmosphere, just like the hearts of the people in the city. But there the snow only reached their thighs. As they continued forward, Xiangqian's bad feeling grew stronger. When they finally stepped into the semi-desert, Xiangqian panted and looked into the distance. Here the snow only reached their knees. They continued forward step by step into this once dry land. There were camel beasts looking for ice on the ground. Their fur had grown long, and they huddled together in groups for warmth, eating snow to replenish their water. When they saw Xiangqian's group, the camel beasts turned around and ran away. Xiangqian did not chase. He still had food on him, and he was not in the mood to hunt. His footsteps quickened as he headed straight for the sea. Tall cylindrical cacti stood there like icicles. They were like thorns stabbing at Xiangqian's group until their hearts bled. The sea did not freeze. Only the areas near the sea were partially frozen. But that ice was nothing compared to the layer of ice in the man-made river in front of the tribe. Could people walk on it? Not to mention, the sea was still flowing far away from the shore. The wind lifted the waves, crashing against the frozen ice. The blue sea, the snow-covered sand, the clash of two colors. To some people this was a rare beauty. But Xiangqian's group was utterly disappointed. It was as if they had lost all their strength. Their exhaustion intensified. They knelt on the snow-covered sand, punching holes in the ground. Their path was cut off. They didn't even know if there was any hope of crossing this sea in their lifetime. How long was a person's life? For people who did the same thing every day, it seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Xiangqian seemed to see his old self sitting at the door, chopping wood and making straw rope. But the people of the same age as him in the neighboring tribe were happily dragging their prey back and forth every day. He could not bear to think about it anymore. With a sigh and a strong sense of disappointment, Xiangqian's group returned to the tribe. If the shamaness knew, she would probably cry herself to death by the fire pit. How long would they have to wait to return to their homeland? Where was the road? None of them knew. Chapter 478. Royal City. This year's snow caught everyone in Royal City off guard. Even the Yi family did not foresee such a disaster. At most, they predicted that it would snow early and snow heavily. These were all predicted. Even the approximate time of the snow was announced. However, no one would have thought that the so-called heavy snow was actually such a situation. Everyone was frowning all day. In the fields outside the city, a large number of crops had died. Recently, every field owner's mood was like a blizzard. The slaves were trembling in fear, afraid of being beaten to death or thrown out of the royal city fields. Beating them to death was fine, but if they were thrown out, they would be tortured by the cold. How could they survive in the snow outside that was half the height of a person? Inside the golden grain fields, it was also gloomy. The field owner, Jiju, had thrown a few tantrums recently. The senior and junior stewards all shrunk their heads and did not dare to make a fuss. Jiju's anger was not directed at his subordinates. Although he complained about the weather, the ones he scolded the most were the E family. A bunch of trash. An exquisitely designed teapot with colorful patterns was thrown out and smashed to pieces. 2 copper plates were also smashed to the ground with a clatter. The junior stewards outside trembled. They did not dare to step in. They just stood there like ostriches. Inside the house, the senior steward waited for Jiju to calm down before lowering his head to tidy up the things on the ground. There were no other servants here. Only the senior steward came in and out often. The junior stewards had to stay far away unless they were permitted. The house was warm with a stove burning. Jiju sat cross-legged on a thick furry cushion. He was in a bad mood because another crop in the field had frozen to death. Even though they were prepared for the cold, they still could not withstand this kind of weather. How many times had this happened since winter? 7 times? 8 times? In the past, even if other fields had crops frozen to death in winter, it rarely happened in the golden grain fields. Jiju saw this as a mistake. As long as he did the right thing, he could avoid it. Jiju had always felt that he had done a perfect job. The 1,000-grain gold incident was a little depressing because the Yinjiao people had planted it first, but it passed quickly. Now the 8th mistake had occurred. How could he, who had always pursued perfection, remain calm? Although it was due to the weather, it was a fact that something had happened. It couldn't be denied. Trash. Jiju scolded again. The trash he was referring to was still the E family. Usually those people would raise their chins to the sky, but now? He couldn't even answer when asked when the weather would improve. What a piece of trash. Jiju wanted to ask the most powerful old man in the E family. Unfortunately, the old man had been in seclusion for years. Even if Jiju went personally, the old man would not come out and help with the divination. What's going on outside? Jiju drank some hot water to moisten his throat and asked. The chief steward quickly glanced at the few figures shivering in the cold outside. He bowed and replied, I heard that they are here to deliver a message. What message? Jiju's tone was getting worse. The chief steward bowed even lower, not daring to look at Jiju's face. They say, someone wants your grains, Bam. Jiju slammed the copper cup in his hand on the ground. Tell them to scram. The chief steward paused and did not leave immediately. Instead he said, I heard that another tribe came to seek refuge in the royal city. The king asked the other nobles to give some grains as a loan to the new tribe. They didn't come before. Now that there's a snow disaster, they all came quickly. Jiju's tone was sarcastic, but he didn't take it to heart. No. If the others want to give, let them. Our golden grain fields won't give. The nobles of the royal city did intend to take advantage of this snow disaster to take in a few more tribes. It was fine at first, but now the snow showed no signs of stopping. More and more tribes came to seek refuge. Settling them down was difficult. There was a serious shortage of food. The higher-ups were troubled. Even the grains in the hands of the nobles were not enough. Knowing that the fields had a bountiful harvest today, they all came to Jiju, hoping that he would provide some support. After all, the more people who came to seek refuge, the bigger the kingdom would be. It would be far from the influence of the tribes. Receiving Jiju's message, the chief steward did not speak. He only listened to Jiju. As for the others, it was none of his business. A few junior stewards who had been given important tasks by the other nobles were called in by Jiju and scolded. 2 of them were even stripped of their duties. No matter how much the junior steward cried and begged, Jiju ignored him. Just as the 2 junior stewards were feeling gloomy, someone rushed in from outside. It was a guard from the fields. one who was in charge of guarding the 1,000-grain gold. Seeing someone rush in without notifying him, Jeju was about to explode in anger. But when he saw who it was, he suppressed his anger and asked nervously, "Did something happen over there?" No, it's not," the person panted. His face was red, either from excitement or from the cold. "Is it yes or no?" Jeju was angry. "Master, over there it's ripened." The two words jumped out of the guard's mouth. As soon as he heard ripened, Jeju rushed out. The junior steward who was still sobbing in the room thought quickly. If something good happened over there and the master was in a good mood, would he be able to plead for leniency? Thinking of this, the two junior stewards did not care about their fur coats and rushed out as well. Jeju's 1,000-grain gold had ripened in the middle of the snowstorm, much earlier than he had expected. In the snow, the golden husks were dazzling. Even the guards outside could smell an extremely fragrant smell. The smell was not strong, but it made people drool. Jeju personally harvested the grains and carefully peeled off one of them. After removing the golden husks, the grains inside were white. Jeju's eyes narrowed. He remembered something he had asked Xiaoxian before. "Xiaoxian, what color do you think the grains in my field will be in the end?" "White." "White." That was what Xiaoxian had answered back then. "It's really white." Jeju felt that the ripening of the 1,000-grain gold was a hint to him. Just one grain of white 1,000-grain gold was enough to fill a person's stomach for at least a day. It was not an illusion either. They were truly full. When the royal city needed grains the most, the 1,000-grain gold had ripened. Jeju looked at the snow outside in silence. After a while, he said to the senior steward, "Call them over." They referred to those small stewards just now. Jeju decided to open the barn to sell the grains. He did not have a good impression of those who only came to seek shelter now. But he was willing to follow the hint of the 1,000-grain gold. Even if he was wrong in the end, at least he had tried. At that moment, a few special guests came to the royal city's family. Because everyone was talking about the new tribe, they did not pay much attention to these people. They thought they were from the same tribe. The people who came to the family were the fox chief and the flirtatious woman. When they escaped from the salt flats, there were only 100 of them left. They did not manage to escape back to the tribe. Because of the king beast's pursuit, they changed directions at the last minute. Otherwise, they would have been in a worse state. The rest of the Shan tribe became bait to lure the king beast away. That was the only way they could escape. After leaving the salt flats, the fox chief led the rest of his people away. They did not return to the tribe. Instead, they left the forest. If they returned to the tribe like this, they would lose the salt mine, the fire crystals, and so many people. They would despise him and he would lose his position as chief. That was why the fox chief decided to find a solution before returning to the tribe. The woman beside the fox chief was half family blood. However, her divination skills were not outstanding. She would not be treated well if she stayed with the family. That was why she spent most of her time in the fox tribe. However, the fox tribe and the family still interacted frequently. The fox chief knew roughly when the weather would change because of the family's help. This time the fox chief came to ask for help. He wanted to work with the family to deal with the Yinjiao tribe. The family might not agree to deal with the Mountain Wind and Taihe tribes. Even if they won, it would be a devastating victory. It would not be worth it. However, if they were going to deal with the Flaming Horns, they would have to reconsider. Because the Yinjiao were outsiders. The family and the other families in the royal city were wary of them. The fox chief heard this from the woman beside him. She had learned this when they came to the royal city in winter. This was the perfect time to make things worse. Although the fox chief wanted to get rid of all three tribes, he had to do it one by one. First, he had to deal with the Yinjiao tribe. Along the way, the fox chief had thought about many things. The more he thought, the more he hated the Yinjiao people. That was why they were in such dire straits. That was why when he spoke to the family, the fox chief made many guesses. The Yinjiao people seem to know when the weather will change. They are even more accurate than you. They came at the right time and left just as the storm stopped. It was just a guess and the fox chief did not believe it himself. But in order to instill fear in the family, he had to be sure. Also, I heard the king beast roar at them, but I didn't see their bodies. Even if they were eaten by the king beast, it shouldn't have eaten them all. There wasn't even a trace of blood. They also brought a lot of salt and fire crystals. The fox chief added fuel to the fire. When they heard that someone was more accurate than the E family, the faces of the E family members changed. When they heard that someone could leave alive after being eaten by the king beast, they became even more fearful. The fire crystals were not as attractive. Are you telling the truth? The person sitting at the head of the table asked in a low voice. He did not want to pursue the matter of the fox hiding the salt. It was just salt. The E family did not care about it, but the other things were different. It's true. The fox chief looked at the woman beside him. She hurriedly stood up and bowed. It's true. When she lowered her head, a strange light flashed in her eyes. The fox leader probably did not believe his own words, but she knew that it was the truth. The Yinjiao people seemed to have an even bigger secret. The E family did not believe everything the two of them said. But when they questioned the other fox tribesmen who came with the fox chief, they believed most of it. The E family asked questions skillfully. They did not believe that the tribesmen could lie to them. That was why even if the fox chief's words were not entirely true, most of it was the truth. A few of the E family's most powerful people gathered for a discussion. I told you we have to be careful of the Yinjiao people. The Yinjiao people cannot be allowed to live. I will go to the king tomorrow and discuss this with the other families, said the person sitting at the head of the table. The Yinjiao people had to be dealt with. Perhaps this change in the weather was a hint from the heavens. Chapter 479. Any member of the E family who was slightly better at divination would feel an indescribable sense of danger. It was not the type that would destroy them, but it would always distract them from other things. Their minds would be in turmoil, but the divination would not yield any results. This was a very unpleasant feeling. For the E family who prided themselves on being able to see into the future, this was like a knife hanging over their heads. This year's snowstorm was like a slap to their faces. Ever since the weather became like this, many people had paid the E family handsomely for a hint, but there was a limit to what the E family could do. The arrival of the fox chief was, without a doubt, another way for them to vent their frustrations. It also gave them a hint to ease their discomfort. Perhaps it was because of the Yinjiao people that they felt threatened? Didn't the one from the E family make a prophecy? The aristocrats of the 6 tribes had been worried about what the prophecy was referring to. The last time the Yinjiao people came to the royal city, they sent the Linlu chief flying with one blow and destroyed the royal city gates. This was enough to strike fear into the people of the royal city. Back then, some people had linked the Yinjiao people to the previous divination results and suggested that Yinjiao was a threat, but most people did not believe it. But now, after hearing the fox chief's words, the E family began to plan. The next day, the head of the E family went to the palace to discuss with the king and the other aristocrats. To them, if there was a threat, they had to nip it in the bud. They could not give it a chance to grow. When that young man from Yinjiao destroyed the royal city gates, some people had already begun to speculate. Now there was an even bigger problem. The Yinjiao people can predict the weather more accurately? Forget about the weather. Can the Yinjiao people really fight against a beast king? This was something to be wary of. With such a dangerous tribe around, they could not help but feel uneasy when they thought about the divination conclusion that the world will be divided after a long time, and the world will be united after a long time. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was heavy. Once a cloud of suspicion formed in one's heart, it would be difficult to disperse. This was especially true for those who had been suspicious for a long time. Now that they finally found a suspected breakthrough, they would definitely not give up. If the Yinjiao people knew what these people were talking about, they would probably vomit blood. Bullshit. If they could fight against the Beast King, why would they give up so much high-quality salt and fire crystals? However, once these people think you're a threat, it's hard to convince them otherwise. The cold winter will pass. This winter came early and ferociously, but it also left late. When the wind and snow finally stopped, when the sun finally broke through the thick dark clouds and shone on the earth, the people who had been gloomy for a long time looked up to the sky and roared. The weather turned sunny, and winter was officially over. The temperature rose quickly, not giving people enough time to adjust. The tribesmen were clearing the thick snow. In fact, most of it had already been cleared by Xiaoxian. In most places the snow was knee-deep. These were all cleared by Xiaoxian when he was practicing. The densely populated areas were also cleaned every day, so they did not have to deal with the melting snow. Water was dripping from the eaves, and everywhere in the tribe was wet. The patrolling warriors were reluctant to leave as they watched the ice brick sentry posts slowly melt. They had not had enough fun, but relatively speaking they still preferred warmer weather. That way they could go out and hunt. The melting snow made the river in front of the tribe rise a lot. The people near the foot of the mountain had to move up. There was a lot of water in many places in the forest. It was inconvenient to go out and hunt. However, the large amount of stagnant water also caused some animals to come out of their burrows to hide. The soldiers also encountered many small beasts as they walked around the area. The ducks that had been frozen all winter rushed out of the duck shed. They were not afraid of the cold. They jumped into the river or flew into the forest. The person who took care of the duck shed finally saw the fat duck. The fat duck walked out with a group of similar-looking green fur balls. It looked at everyone with caution but did not attack. 31. Not one is missing, the person said happily. Hey, what are the ducklings eating? Xiaoxian looked over. It's probably an earthworm. Before Xiaoxian could finish the word earthworm, he saw a thumb-sized worm being pecked by the green furry balls. It opened its mouth full of sharp teeth. Probably an insect that crawled out from the ground. Xiaoxian could only say so. He did not know what these earthworm-like insects were called. They had never crawled out before. Now they were probably forced out by the melting snow. There were also some wriggling or crawling insects that came out from the river in front of the tribe. The river rose and flooded what used to be the ground. Now these insects were scrambling to climb higher. This was a great advantage for the ducks. The fat duck led the 31 green furballs to peck at the rising river. They ate what the other ducks ate. They ate what the other ducks did not eat. With this group of ducks, the people in the tribe did not have to kill the insects themselves. The ducks jumped around the river bank. Some even fought for food. The weather turned warm quickly. Yesterday they were still wearing thick furs. Today, they only wore their usual hunting clothes. The people who worked were sweating all over. This weather is too strange, said Xiaoxian. He did not know what this weather change meant. Since the weather was really warm, winter was over. The tribe would hold their annual ceremony. However, the shamaness was distracted. Not only was she distracted, but so was Chief Zhengluo. He often stood at the top of the mountain and looked into the distance. Xiaoxian knew that they were waiting for news. They were waiting for the people who left in winter to bring back good news. Even if they did not make it this time, what if the next winter was the same? Then they could seize the opportunity. However, Xiaoxian had a feeling that the shamaness and the chief's plan might not work. 2 days later, all the snow in the tribe was cleared. The wet ground was much drier after 3 days of sun. The river receded quickly too. No one knew where the water went. The river in front of the tribe was connected to another river outside. It was blocked by something, so the dangerous creatures in the other river could not come over. However, the water flowed. Now the rising river was obviously receding every day. In a few days it would reach the water level before winter. That night, the ceremony went on as usual. The people who were sent out in winter had not returned. This was within everyone's expectations. It took time to travel, and it took even longer to travel in the snow. This year's ceremony was especially quiet. The shamaness and the chief were not in the mood. Those who knew were also distracted. However, for the ceremony and to respect their ancestors, they temporarily put aside their emotions. Even if they wanted to think about something, they would have to wait until the ceremony was over. As the shamaness chanted, the flames in the fire pit rose. The heat of the flames chased away the remaining chill of the night. Xiaoxian's bone ornaments also reacted. They were almost connected to the flames in the fire pit. The rising flames gradually formed a flame giant. The tribe was no longer surprised by the appearance of this flame giant. However, this time the flame giant gave Xiaoxian a different feeling. The power of inheritance in his body did not run wild. In other words, the flame giant's appearance was the result of the bone ornament's own power. It was similar to the previous ceremonies. It was not under Xiao Xian's control. After seeing the flame giant, the people in the tribe all knelt down. Even the most arrogant warriors and the elders who liked to throw tantrums knelt down respectfully. Especially the warriors who went to the salt mines with Zheng Luo. They were especially pious. Without the protection of their ancestors, they would not have been able to escape from the king beast. Xiao Xian looked up at the flame giant in the sky. At this time last year, the flame giant slowly turned and stood in the direction Xiao Xian had come from. Today, the flame giant also turned and faced the familiar direction. The difference was that after turning, it raised an arm and pointed in that direction. Many people in the tribe saw this. Those who had lowered their heads also looked up in the direction of the flame giant. What was the ancestor hinting at? The shamaness was shocked. She stood by the fire pit in a daze, looking at the flame giant in the sky. Only when the flame giant disappeared did the shamaness continue the ceremony. When the ceremony was over, everyone dispersed. They discussed the meaning of the ancestor pointing in that direction during the ceremony. By the fire pit. After the ceremony, only a small flame was left in the fire pit. It was not bright. The shamaness was still standing there. Xiao Xian, did you hear that? Asked the shamaness. Hear what? Xiao Xian was confused. The ancestor's voice. The shamaness closed her eyes. What did the ancestor say? Xiao Xian asked. The shamaness did not speak. After a moment of silence she said, "It's time to go back." Xiao Xian looked at the shamaness in surprise. He was sure that the shamaness was serious. You plan to move? That's right. The ancestor's appearance just now was an indication, said the shamaness. But how do we get there? Don't we have to wait for Xiangchan to bring back news? Xiao Xian asked. Xiangchan might not bring back good news. The shamaness sighed. But the ancestor is telling us that it's time to go back. That was what the shamaness thought. Since the ancestor said it was time to go back, then it was time to act. As for what method to use, they had to think of it themselves. However, the shamaness did not think that the ancestor was making things difficult for them. Perhaps the ancestor already had a way. They just didn't know about it. Xiao Xian was thinking about the shamaness words when he sensed something. He looked up and saw the shamaness staring at him. Why are you looking at me? The shamaness smiled. Maybe the ancestor will tell you the way to leave. That would depend on the ancestor's spirit. Xiao Xian thought to himself. At the same time, on the other side of the sea, in the fearsome beast forest in the Yanjiao tribe, the old shamaness stood by the fire pit. She looked at the fire seat in the fire pit and thought about the flame giant that had appeared during the ceremony. The giant raised an arm and pointed in the direction it was facing. What did this mean? The old man stood there for a long time enjoying the night breeze. Chapter 480. 2 days after the ceremony, someone from the Mountain Wind tribe hurried over. It was their chief. Where's your chief? I need to talk to him. The Mountain Wind chief asked a Yinjiao patrol to bring him to Zheng Luo. If Zheng Luo isn't here, your elder is fine too. Ever since the salt mine incident, the Mountain Wind tribesmen were more cautious of Yinjiao's young elder. They did not underestimate him. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian, they would not have been able to return safely. The chief and elder are here. The patrol sent someone to report and brought the Mountain Wind tribesmen up the mountain. After the salt mine incident, Yinjiao and Mountain Wind tribesmen got along a little better. Seeing Lanmu's serious expression, it seemed like there was something very important. The guy did not waste any time and hurried up the mountain. According to tradition, after winter and the ceremony, they would welcome the first hunt of the year. In previous years, the important people of the tribe would gather at the top of the mountain for a meeting to prepare for the hunt. Today they were gathered as well. However, they were not discussing the hunt, but other things. The shamaness told everyone about the instructions she received at the ceremony. She also mentioned her idea. However, they did not know how to leave just yet, so the meeting froze halfway through. No one was willing to migrate the entire tribe before finding a solution. There were too many variables. This was not a joke, and they could not afford to do so. Just then, Someone came to report that the mountain wind chief had come personally. It seemed like something important had happened. Zhang Luo told the others to go back and think about it. They would continue the meeting tomorrow. The frequency of meetings had increased significantly since winter. Seeing Lanmu, Zhang Luo's heart sank. He knew that Mountain Wind had been planning to attack the Fox tribe after the snow ended. If the Fox tribesmen did not return safely from the salt mine, the Fox tribe would be greatly weakened and Mountain Wind would have a chance to strike. However, seeing Lanmu's expression, it did not seem like something good had happened. Did the Fox tribesmen return safely too? What? Did something happen at the Fox tribe? Asked Zhang Luo. More than that. Lanmu sat down and told Zhang Luo what he knew. During the winter, after we returned, we did not send anyone over to check on the Fox tribe's situation due to the snowstorm. A few days ago, we thought that winter was about to end, so we sent someone over to check. Who would have thought that the Fox people were migrating? There were too few people who went to investigate, so we didn't stop them directly. We didn't have a chance to kill them at all. By the time we got there, most of the people there had already evacuated. There were only a few injured people who couldn't walk anymore. Ramu was angry when he said this. He had been preparing for this for the whole winter, and now he had encountered this situation. Where did the Fox people move to? Asked Zhang Luo. Lanmu glanced at Xiao Xian, who was sitting next to him. Royal City. They're going to the Royal City. This was what he had forced out of the few injured personnel who had been left behind. Royal City? They joined the Royal City. Zhang Luo was surprised. It seems that not many people from the salt mines returned safely. Otherwise, they wouldn't have migrated to the Royal City so easily. That's right. According to what I heard, less than 20 Shin tribesmen returned from the salt mines. They were all heavily injured too. The Fox tribesmen probably aren't any better. But, get to the point. Xiao Xian, who had been quiet all this while, spoke up. What Lanmu knew must have something to do with him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept glancing at them. Lanmu paused. I heard that Elder Xiao Xian went to the Royal City before winter? Yes, answered Xiao Xian. The 6 major cities issued a bounty for the capture of the Yinjiao tribesmen. I heard it's because of the destruction of the Royal City's walls. When Lanmu first heard the news, he was surprised. The Yinjiao tribesmen were too strong. They even destroyed the Royal City's walls. The Mountain Wind tribe was relatively well informed. Their tribe was located on the outskirts of the forest. He didn't know how they got the news so quickly. Could have been a bird or something else. In any case, the Mountain Wind tribe was a cut above the rest when it came to information. Since Lanmu said so, it was most likely true. You want to attack the Yinjiao tribe just by destroying their walls? Said Zhang Luo angrily. That's a far-fetched reason. Their walls aren't strong enough. One touch and it breaks. You're blaming us for being strong. Lanmu's face twitched. What did he mean by one touch and it breaks? That's the Royal City's walls, not your backyard's fence. If it were me, I'd be afraid too. Rumor has it that the weather changed this past winter because of the Yinjiao tribe. I also heard. Lanmu glanced at Zhang Luo and the other's sour expressions. He continued. I also heard that the Yinjiao tribesmen lured out a king beast that lives in the snow. It'll bring about an even greater disaster. Bullshit. Zhang Luo's face darkened. Why was the Yinjiao tribesman taking all the blame? You believe that? I don't. But there must be other reasons. It might have something to do with the Fox tribe or something else. But the news about them attacking you must be true. I came as soon as I heard the news. After all, he'd experienced it himself. If the Yinjiao tribesmen really had something to do with the king beast, would they have been in such a sorry state? But to say they had nothing to do with it, Lanmu still doubted it. After all, only one person knew how they'd escaped from the king beast and what had happened after they'd fainted. Thinking of this, Lanmu glanced at Xiao Xian again suspiciously. His eyes met Xiao Xian's and Lanmu's heart skipped a beat. He quickly looked away. He didn't want to provoke this young man now. Who knew which idiot's idea was to blame the Yinjiao tribesmen for the weather change? How could a tribe affect the weather so easily? Were the people who believed that idiots? But there were many who believed it and treated the Yinjiao tribesmen like the plague. Lamu only told them what he knew as a way of thanking Yanjiao for their help at the salt mines. Before he left, Lamu thought about it and asked, "You Yanjiao people really came from somewhere else?" Zheng Luo's eyelid twitched. Clearly, this was the most important reason why the others were targeting Yanjiao. Their Yanjiao tribe didn't belong to this land. It was just that thousands of years had passed and many people had forgotten. Many people thought the Yanjiao tribe came from somewhere else but didn't know that 1,000 years ago, they didn't even exist here. Lanmu opened his mouth but in the end, he shook his head and sighed. You all should be careful. It seemed to be a natural instinct to exclude others. Back then, the Yanjiao tribe left the crowded areas and settled here for two reasons. One, they liked the living environment here. Two, they wanted people to forget Yanjiao's origins. The ancestral record said that when the Yanjiao people first arrived, they were ostracized and lost many people. Were they going to experience it again? After Lanmu left, Xiangchan and the others finally returned with similar news. Amba City had already posted a notice saying that the Yanjiao people had been demonized. When Xiangchan and the others were hiding, they even heard people talking about Yanjiao's strength. Was it wrong for them to be strong? Xiaoxian didn't know how many people believed the rumors, but Xiaoxian was sure that if there was a reward and a secret leak about the salt and fire crystals, there would be even more people willing to go. These people were planning to slowly encroach on the Flaming Horn tribe's power. They didn't plan to attack them directly. If the Great Six wanted to attack Yanjiao, they didn't have to do it themselves. They knew that Yanjiao wasn't easy to deal with. This was a good time for the greedy and dependent to make contributions. Also, they heard that the royal city had taken in many people during the winter and gave them so many benefits. Would the slave masters really do that? In the forest, due to competition, the tribes didn't interact much. The only good collaborator was the neighboring Taiha tribe. The mountain wind people were just returning the favor and didn't want to get involved. But it was understandable. It's time to leave. The shamaness got up and walked outside. She stood on the peak of the mountain and looked at the budding trees in the distance. Rather than wait for people to come and provoke them, it was better to leave now. Their ancestors' instructions couldn't be wrong. Zheng Luo called for an emergency meeting. Not long after, the entire tribe was mobilized. Zheng Luo took the time to visit the neighboring Taiha tribe's chief. Since Lanmu had come to Yanjiao, he would naturally go to the nearby Taiha tribe to say goodbye. That was why the Taiha chief already knew about Yanjiao's current situation. He thought that Zheng Luo had come to ask for help. After being neighbors for so many years, the Taiha people were willing to help. He didn't expect Zheng Luo to come to say goodbye. Knowing that the Taiha people were willing to help, Zheng Luo was already very grateful. They had been neighbors for so many years. They had quarreled, fought, but in the end it was still this neighbor who was willing to help them. Perhaps this was the reason why their overbearing ancestors were willing to be neighbors with the Taiha people. After thanking him, Zheng Luo told him why he was here. I'm here to say goodbye. Zheng Luo looked at his old rival who was much older than him. Leave. The Taiha chief almost dropped the bronze cup he used to show off. What did he mean? Was he afraid of being targeted by the 6 tribes? Was he going to hide in a more secluded place? The Yanjiao people they knew weren't this cowardly. Aren't they just a bunch of arrogant nobles? If we build our own city, we can call ourselves nobles too. Why should we be afraid of them? Don't care what they say, just pretend they're talking nonsense. At most, we won't leave the forest. In the forest, we still have the advantage, said the Taiha chief unhappily. We're from another continent, said Zheng Luo. I know. What does it matter where we're from? Could it be that you don't dare to fight? The Taiha chief didn't think it was a big deal. It was rare to have a neighbor and they didn't want to lose him. Who would help them carry things when they went on a trade trip? No, we're just going back. Although Zheng Luo didn't know why the shaman was so confident, he just had to believe in her. Go back? What did she mean? The Taiha chief didn't understand until Zheng Luo left. Chapter 481. It had been hundreds of years since the ancestors of the tribe came here. They had fought for a piece of land and lived here until now. It had been passed down from one generation to the next. They knew every detail of the houses and the cultivation of the fields. Every place had a history and memory. When they heard that they were going to pack up and leave, the people in the tribe were shocked. They didn't know how to react and just followed their leader's orders. When they came back to their senses, they started talking. When they heard that the nobles from the 6 tribes were going to attack their tribe, they were furious. Some of the warriors wanted to fight them, but Duokong heard them and beat them up. You think we're afraid? Bullshit. Why would we Yinjiao be afraid of those arrogant slave masters? The reason we're leaving is because we're going back. Duokong said loudly. The people who were packing up stopped in their tracks. Go back? Go back where? What did their leader mean? The warrior who was beaten up by Duokong forgot to get up and asked, "Leader, aren't we right here? Where are we going?" "We're going back to where our ancestors came from." Duokong left after saying that. He still had to go down the mountain to inspect other places. Because of the departure, the whole tribe was a little anxious. In order to prevent the energetic warriors from making trouble because they didn't get to hunt, he had to calm them down. The bruised warrior on the ground looked at Duokang's back as he left. He dug at the dried ground and thought about Duokang's words. We're going back to where our ancestors came from? Where our ancestors came from? Shaoxian. He heard that Shaoxian came from there too. Did that mean they were going to the legendary birthplace of the Yinjiao tribe? Xiangqian and the others had just returned to the tribe. Initially, they were disheartened by the fact that the sea had yet to freeze. After hearing the bad rumors about the Flaming Horn tribe, they wanted to fight it out with these people. They didn't expect things to turn out this way. The Yinjiao people were sick. Xiangqian had heard about this from his father a long time ago. They just didn't talk about it. If other people said that the Yinjiao people were sick, he would definitely scold them back. You're the one who's sick, your entire tribe is sick. However, that was the truth of the matter. After scolding him, Xiangqian began to wonder when he would recover from his illness. But now the opportunity had come. Although he didn't know what the shamaness was thinking, since the shamaness and the chief had decided to leave, he would do the same. What about the duck shed? The person taking care of the ducks was reluctant to let them go. He ran over and asked Shaoxian. Just leave them there. Leave the duck shed to them. In the future, if they want to leave, they can leave. If they want to stay here, then let them stay. These ducks were too ordinary, and the people in the tribe didn't care for them. It was troublesome to bring them along. Should they kill them and roast them? He might as well hunt a few ferocious beasts to satisfy himself. Those duck eggs were the protection fee for these ducks. How many eggs did we pick up today? What should we do? The man asked again. Cook them and bring them along? Where's the green duck? The man asked expectantly. Shaoxian looked at the fat duck that was swimming in the river with a flock of green feathers. Shaoxian couldn't wait for these green eggs. However, the duck eggs had helped the Yinjiao before, so Shaoxian didn't kill them. Don't worry about it. The copper cauldron had already been smelted into other copper products. There were pots and kettles, which were distributed to the tribe's meritorious members. They couldn't bear to throw them away and planned to keep them with them. The salt had been successfully refined. Most of it was distributed to the people in the tribe, while the shamaness kept the rest. The grains and herbs were also distributed within a day. The people in the tribe were so busy that they didn't have time to think about anything else, let alone feel sad. Shaoxian had experienced a big migration before. This was the second one, but the situation was slightly different. This time there were many people who were hostile towards them. Perhaps it wouldn't be as smooth as the first one. Shaoxian and Zhengluo had discussed the migration route. Xiangqian's route could no longer be used. Someone must have seen the Yinjiao on that route. Perhaps someone had already set up an ambush, waiting for the Yinjiao to come knocking on their door. That route would also pass by several cities. They could use it in the past because it was convenient for them to resupply. Now they had to avoid it. In comparison, Shaoxian's route was much safer because it avoided places with many people. Perhaps there were dangers in the forest, but that route was the shortest. Plus, there were so many people. If they encountered a fierce beast, everyone could work together to fend it off. Let's go with this one. Zhengluo's finger tapped on Shaoxian's map. First, send someone to scout out the situation in the forest. Clear the path. That night, when most of the people in the tribe couldn't sleep, Shaoxian had a dream. He dreamed of the first shaman of the tribe. He couldn't see the shaman's face clearly, only a blurry figure. But Xiao Xian had a special feeling that he was sure of this person's identity. The legendary first shaman of the Yinjiao tribe, and the original owner of the 6 bone ornaments. In Xiao Xian's dream he saw the shaman walking down a long and narrow path, step by step, walking into the distance. That path was familiar. The surroundings were dark, and there was the sound of flowing water. Beside him there were some vague large figures moving slowly, like giant beasts in the sea. His eyes flew open. Xiao Xian was still in a daze, but the scene in the dream was still vivid. Every detail was crystal clear except for that blurry figure. Outside the window it was already dawn. Light could be seen through the wooden window. Getting up, Xiao Xian quickly rinsed his mouth with cold water, wiped his face, and ran to find the shaman without eating breakfast. Early in the morning, the shaman wasn't in the house. She stood by the fire pit, staring blankly at it. In the past night, the shaman didn't sleep at all. She stood by the fire pit for the whole night. Although her face was calm, there were obvious dark circles under her eyes. Under her drooping eyelids, her eyes were bloodshot. Perhaps the shaman wasn't as calm as she looked. After all, the tribe's migration was a big deal. She and the chief were under a lot of pressure to make this decision. Seeing Xiao Xian, the shaman asked, "What's the hurry?" "There's something I don't understand," said Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian told her about his dream last night. He didn't know if it was a hint from the ancestors, or if he was overthinking it. After hearing Xiao Xian's story, the shaman's listless eyes lit up. She squinted slightly, and the wrinkles on her face deepened. "That's the path. It's the path the ancestors showed us. Maybe when we get there it'll turn into what you saw. Then the path will be formed," said the shaman with certainty. She believed the ancestors wouldn't lie to them. "But don't worry, it's definitely a hint from the ancestors." But before Xiao Xian could finish, the shaman raised her hand to stop Xiao Xian. "You have to believe in the ancestors." "I do," said Xiao Xian helplessly. "Then it's fine. All we need to do is bring the tribesmen there." After hearing Xiao Xian's words, the shaman felt much better. She decided to talk to Zheng Luo. Zheng Luo was probably under a lot of pressure, so he didn't sleep at all. Early in the morning, she heard Zheng Luo lecturing the tribesmen. Seeing the shaman leave quickly, Xiao Xian scratched his head. He didn't think he'd encounter the same situation as last time. In his dream he didn't encounter the sound of flowing water or the huge figures. 2 days later the tribe gathered. The scouting team had returned. They could walk through the forest, but there were puddles in some places. They had to be careful. On the mountain the fire pit was still there. But without the Yinjiao tribesmen, the fire pit had lost its purpose. The house was still there, but no one lived there. It was empty and lonely. In the fields some weeds had sprouted. The crops hadn't been planted, so the tribesmen had to give up on this opportunity and save the seeds. In the man-made river that was dug around the mountain, ducks of different colors and sizes were swimming in it. The temperature was rising quickly, the water was already warm. The ducks were lively after a harsh winter. Are we really leaving these for the Taiha people? Duokong couldn't bear to leave them. But after they left, this place would be ownerless. They didn't want to give it to anyone else, so they could only give it to the Taiha tribe. They're lucky. I hope they don't eat all the ducks, said someone who used to live near the duck shed. I don't care about the others, but I can't bear to leave those green ducks behind. The duck shed keeper kept looking back. The long line of people left. The fat duck in the river looked at them quietly. It was confused, but it had no intention of following them. It only watched as the last person in the line crossed the bridge before turning back to swim with the other ducklings. When the line passed by the Taiha tribe, Xiao Xian saw a group of people waiting there. Most of them were from the hunting team. They were familiar with each other, including Quan Bai, and the others who stayed with the Yinjiao tribe for a long time when they planted the 1,000-grain gold. They were here to send them off. This was the last time they saw each other. Whether it was the Yinjiao people or the Taiha people, they were all reluctant to part. Take these with you. The Taiha chief took out 2 large cloth bags. They were filled with the herbs they'd rushed to produce in the past 2 days. Take care. Thank you, take care. Zheng Luo patted the Taiha chief's shoulder. Right, don't eat those green ducks over there. Take care of them. You'll be rewarded. Xiaoxian should have told you, right? Asked Zheng Luo. I know. Don't worry, said the Taihe chief. Why did that sound so awkward? They didn't hesitate anymore. They gave the two sides a short time to leave. Two old people knelt and cried. There were Yinjiao people who had married into the Taihe tribe. There were also Taihe people who had married into the Yinjiao tribe. There hadn't been any intermarriage in recent years, but there were still some who were still alive. They wanted to leave with the Yinjiao, but they were already very old. They would only be a burden if they followed the team. The shaman raised his hand and patted them on the head. Stay. The line set off again, gradually leaving this place where they'd lived for hundreds of years. Zheng Luo looked back in the direction of the hill. The tall trees blocked his view. He looked back, his steps firm as he walked at the front of the line. Their ancestors said that one day, the Yinjiao people who left would return to their homeland. This was the day their generation met. Chapter 482. Roar. A mournful roar echoed through the forest. After the sound of metal clashing, the roar finally stopped, and the heavy breathing gradually calmed down. Xiaoxian pulled a leaf from the side and wiped the blood off his sword. The soldiers next to him went over to deal with the beast that had just been killed. They opened the kettle and poured the blood into it. If it was in the past, they would try their best to keep the animal skin intact after killing the prey. But now they no longer needed that, and the animal skin would not be hoarded for trade. All they needed was food, and this ferocious beast had become the warriors' lunch. 7 or 8 people dealt with the beast at the same time. They removed the organs, cut off the meat, and left the skin and bones where they were. Duokong passed over a kettle filled with beast blood. Drink some. Xiaoxian waved his hand. No, I didn't use much. Give it to the other soldiers. Duokong grinned and didn't say much. He took a gulp and passed it to the others. The slightly viscous liquid with a strong smell of blood flowed down his esophagus and into his stomach. The energy that he had spent in the morning was gradually replenished, and he felt a little warm. Sweat seeped out of his pores. Duokong pulled a few tender leaves from the side and rubbed his hands to get rid of the coagulated blood clots on his hands. It's been 2 days, and we haven't met anyone chasing after us. Duokong looked at Xiaoxian and waited for Xiaoxian to give him some information. He saw Xiaoxian playing with a straw rope in the morning. Xiaoxian wouldn't be so bored as to play with a straw rope at a time like this. He must be doing some divination. Duokong had been leading the team to guard their surroundings, so he didn't have time to ask. Now that he finally had the chance, he came over to ask. We'll meet them soon. Not everyone thinks we'll go back the way we came, and not everyone will choose to ambush us. Some will take the initiative to attack. Maybe someone can predict our route, Xiaoxian said. They can even predict our route? Duokong was shocked. He didn't believe it, but thinking about the Yi family, it was possible. Although the Yi family had a lot of useless people, there were still some capable people. What are your plans? Duokong asked again. Let's just continue on our way. By the way, have you guys finished the things I asked you to do? Xiaoxian asked. Before they set off, Xiaoxian assigned some tasks to the warriors who were a little more relaxed. With the elderly and children in tow, the journey would definitely not be as fast as when they were hunting, so naturally, some of them would be free. Xiaoxian gave them some time to help with some small tasks. I made a lot. They are all over there. Duokong pointed to a rattan basket not far away. That's good. You guys can leave first. I'll stay behind to set up this place. Xiaoxian walked over and opened the lid of the rattan basket. He was very satisfied with the items inside. Duokong thought of what Xiaoxian had done when they went to Amba City to trade, and encountered the young master of Amba City, who had sent people to kill them. He didn't ask any more questions. He called the other warriors who had finished dealing with the beasts to quickly pack up and continue on their way. Xiangchan saw that Xiaoxian was alone at the back and asked Duokong curiously, Elder, you're not leaving? Our elder has something to do. Duokong gestured for Xiangchan to quickly return to the group. Xiangchan's head was full of questions. He didn't go with Duokong to trade, so he didn't know what happened. Even if he heard about it from others, he didn't have a deep impression of it. He returned to the group and picked up his younger daughter, carried his wife on his back, and hung the other things around his neck or waist. Then Xiang Chun, like the others, continued on their way. Soon the place that was filled with the smell of blood quieted down. The humid and warm air carried the smell of blood. In the distance, the roars of beasts could be heard. Xiao Xian looked up at the sky. Through the cover of the leaves, he could see some flying figures flying back and forth. The scavenger birds couldn't wait any longer. The first one swooped down, broke through the leaves, and headed straight for the remains of the beast on the ground. Xiao Xian slashed it to the ground with his sword. After a few twitches, it died. The other scavenger birds saw this and turned in the air. They rested on the branches not far away and stared at Xiao Xian. More than 20 scavenger birds flew down and rested not far away, staring at Xiao Xian. There were even more in the sky. Xiao Xian was the only one in the area. If it had been someone less brave, they would have been scared. Xiao Xian ignored them. He busied himself around the remains of the beast for a while, slapping a few of the scavenger birds that wanted to attack him to the ground. When he was done, he left and continued to set up traps around the area. Xiao Xian planned to set up another trap. He had asked the soldiers to help him set up traps. There would definitely be pursuers behind him. Even if he couldn't rely on these traps to block all of them, he could at least cause them some damage and delay them. This would also slow down the pursuers. Seeing Xiao Xian leave the beast's corpse, the scavenger birds waiting on the branches rushed up. Many feathers fell as they fought. Because the Yanjiao team had just arrived, the large beasts had already left the area. For the time being, there wouldn't be anything to fight with these scavenger birds for food. The scavenger birds pecked at the remains of the beast's flesh and blood. They blinked their gray eyelids and bit on the bloody meat strands. They were on guard against Xiao Xian. From time to time, they would spread their wings and extend their necks at Xiao Xian. They were trying to drive away Xiao Xian and prevent him from stealing their food. However, Xiao Xian didn't plan to pay any attention to them. He continued with his work. A greenish-gray vine that was thinner than a pinky finger was entwined in the inconspicuous grass. If someone familiar with the forest saw it, they would definitely be on guard. This was because this vine was not found in the vicinity. It was a vine that lived in the swamps. It was thin and tough. Sharp wooden thorns and polished stone needles were hidden by leaves. In less than half an hour, a basket of vines had been hidden nearby. By the time he was done, only skin and bones were left of the beast's corpse. Most of the meat had been cleaned up. The huge beast was now only a pile of skin, bones, and hard teeth. Xiao Xian stood up, glanced around the place, and then left. Taiha tribe. A group of Taiha warriors chased away the sneaky people in the forest. They even killed 2 of them. How many waves has it been? Is it the 3rd wave or the 4th? A warrior asked. Good thing the Yanjiao people left quickly. Otherwise it would be so annoying. In the past 2 days they often encountered people loitering in the nearby forest, especially around the Yanjiao tribe. They had taken over Yanjiao's territory, so they naturally had to send people to guard it and chase away anyone who wanted to get close. Those people seemed to be small groups. They didn't dare to offend the Taiha people. When they saw that the Yanjiao tribe was almost empty, they gave up and went to look for traces of the Yanjiao people in the forest. Some people even wanted to threaten the Taiha people, but this was Taiha territory. They didn't manage to threaten anyone. Instead, they were dragged up the mountain to be used as fertilizer. The sun was setting. At dusk, a group of about 100 people followed the trail. After all, there were so many Yanjiao people. It was impossible for them to not leave any traces behind. For those who were familiar with the area, it was easy to distinguish them. They were the first group of people to catch up. After going to the vicinity of the Flaming Horns tribe to inquire, they didn't stop to follow the trail. They wanted to get some benefits before others. Although there were only about 100 people, they didn't plan to fight head-on. Instead, they planned to kidnap some people and use them as hostages. Then they could threaten the Yanjiao people with fire crystals and salt. They had used this method many times on other people. Compared to fighting head-on, it was much smarter. This time they were full of confidence. Beast carcasses. They passed by here not long ago, said one of them. They approached the carcasses. They wanted to judge the strength of the people who killed them from the carcasses. They also wanted to know the approximate time since the carcasses were killed. This would allow them to estimate the opponent's strength and the time it would take to catch up. However, when the people who went to check on the beast's carcass poked at the beast's bones, which had been pecked clean, a strange change occurred. Buzz, with a rapid trembling sound, as if a chaotic switch had been pressed, the tranquil forest was suddenly filled with murderous intent. The large area of effect stone needles were like rain. Those who tried to dodge would accidentally trigger another round of traps. Every time they thought that they had finally dodged, they would be greeted with another round of attacks, round after round. The noose was like a big hand that suddenly emerged from the ground and tied up those who couldn't escape in time. Those who moved slowly were accidentally pierced by wood and stone needles. When all the chaos finally stopped, those who were still alive didn't dare to move. They looked around vigilantly. Their nerves were tense with every step they took. Some people on the ground were groaning. They were poisoned and trapped. Even if they survived, they couldn't continue to chase for the time being. Although there were only about 20 people who lost their ability to move, 8 of them were dead. The remaining 70 or so were only slightly injured. However, they didn't dare to chase at full speed like before. Fortunately, they were alert enough to dodge quickly. Otherwise, at least half of them would be lying here. Boss, should we continue to chase? A man's face was twisted as he pulled out a wooden thorn from his arm. It was obviously made of wood, but it was such a big threat. The poison on the thorn made his entire arm numb. He applied some medicine and felt better, but he didn't know if it would continue to work. If the poison was too strong, he didn't know if his arm would be crippled. The leader was also alarmed. They hadn't received any information before, so their understanding of the Yinjiao people was limited to strength and arrogance. They didn't expect to suffer such a big loss just as they were about to catch up. Take the injured people away first. We won't chase for now, the leader said. What if the fire crystals and salt are taken by others? Then let them take it first. I'd like to see what other methods the Yinjiao people will use to deal with those behind us. They were at a disadvantage this time because they didn't understand the Yinjiao people. They couldn't blindly chase after them. If they fell into the enemy's trap, only death would await them. After all, they had so few people. They wouldn't be able to get anything, but their own side would be wiped out. If they wanted to experiment, they should let others do it. Chapter 483. When the Flaming Horn tribesmen who were waiting for an ambush on the route that the Flaming Horn tribesmen often took were about to lose their patience. While some people were chasing after the trail in the forest, there was another group of people who took another route. The people in metal armor walked in a line. The people at the front were riding tall horses. These horses were of a carefully selected breed and had been well taken care of. They were very spirited. Their big hooves stomped on the ground, making pung-pung-pung sounds. Even the stones on the road were easily crushed. The horses galloped together like rolling thunder. The people riding on the tall horses held bronze spears in their hands. The spears glowed with a cold light. Coupled with the cold face of the person holding the spear, the people passing by could feel a chill from afar. The coldest winter had passed and the temperature had risen a lot. But when they saw these people, they still couldn't help but shiver and feel a chill down their backs. Because people often walked on this road, there were fewer weeds and no trees in the way. The ground was flat, making it convenient for carriages and horses. The tribe's trading teams often came and went on this road. However, the width of this road was limited. When the caravans passed by, they had to rearrange their formation. It was impossible for 2 teams to pass at the same time, unless one side avoided it and walked on the side with grass, rocks, and pits. In front of them was a traveling caravan from an unknown tribe. The people riding horses at the front of the caravan squeezed their horses' bellies, shook the spears in their hands, and rushed forward with a whoosh. The sharp spears pierced through the air, and the sound was like the whimpering of the cold wind, piercing the people in front of them. Dodge! Dodge! The people in the caravan shouted and drove the carriages and beasts to the side. The people also hurried to the side. They could only dodge when faced with such a group. Seeing this group, the people in the caravan felt a sense of fear. No matter how much courage they had, it would be completely extinguished when faced with such a group. Under such an attack, they could only dodge. The cold air hit them in the face. Before the spears reached them, the murderous aura was already there. If they didn't dodge, they would definitely face these people. They came too quickly. Because the caravan was in a hurry to dodge, a wooden cart piled with goods was almost overturned by a rock. Some goods fell to the ground, but the people in the caravan didn't care about the fallen goods. A young man in the group wanted to pick them up, but an elder grabbed his clothes and dragged him to the side. Rumble, the person on the horse had already arrived. The spear that was thrust out with a slightly cold air, brushing past the side of the young man who was being dragged by the elder. His exposed skin was scraped by the murderous air current, causing goosebumps to appear all over his body. The closer he got, the more he could feel how terrifying they were. This kind of aura, this kind of impact that wanted to sweep everything away, made the young man, who was struggling to pick up the dropped items, freeze like a stone. It seemed that if he moved even a little more, he would be smashed into pieces by this kind of aura. To these people who were rushing over on their horses, everything in their way, whether it was a person or an object, was their enemy. Anyone who stood in the way would be killed. The object was destroyed. The spear in the hands of the person at the front suddenly tilted downwards. The body of the spear shook along with the wrist of the person holding the spear, making a strange whining sound, like the low growl of a fierce beast before biting. Bang! The goods that fell on the ground were swept to the side by the spear head. Because the spear head was swung with too much force, it even had a tearing and destructive power. The linen cloth wrapped around the goods made a tearing sound, and the goods also scattered in the air, breaking into pieces of linen cloth and then drifting down. However, the people who were hiding at the side didn't dare to make a sound at this time. They didn't dare to check how many of the dropped goods were still in good condition, because once they got close, they would be mercilessly stabbed there. With that kind of aura and force, if a person bumped into it where the spear head stabbed, it would be broken. It was unknown whether they could even save their lives. After the horse riders rushed over, the ground was still trembling slightly, and the dust on the dirt road was raised high. The group behind didn't immediately come over, but stopped for a while, waiting for the smoke and dust to be blown away by the wind before the group leisurely passed by. During this period of time before the group arrived, the people who were hiding at the side didn't dare to set foot on this road, so they could only wait. When this group of people all passed by, they could then walk on the road. Otherwise, the scene just now would repeat itself. Didn't they see that the people who rushed over all stopped and stared at them? One of the people on the horse even held a spear and made a poking gesture at them, meaning to move away. If they dared to step on it, they would die. This was strength. If they were weaker than others, they could only stand aside. When the group of people with the shining armor and several giant beasts obediently pulled the carts away, the caravan at the side of the road trembled on the road. Those people just now, who were they? Someone in the caravan asked. Didn't you see the words on the flag? An elder said. Those people should be from the royal city. Those nobles? With their formation, what are they going to do? This kind of group could destroy a city. Which unlucky tribe provoked them? In the past, it was rare to see this group of nobles being serious. Who knows? The caravan once again set off, but the scene just now became a topic of discussion. Along the way, they discussed who those people were going to deal with. If they passed by a city, they would have to ask. On the other side, in the group that had just passed by, there were several carts pulled by giant beasts. The carriages were covered with patterned silk cloth. One of the carriages was pulled by a huge white multi-horned rhinoceros-like beast. There were a few people in luxurious clothing sitting on a cushion in the middle. There was a young man sitting on the cushion, but the long hair hanging down from his temples was already silver white. At this time, the young man had a square wooden plate in front of him. On the plate were some diagrams that intersected with each other. 7 smooth white jade stones were placed on the plate, each of them glowing with a glossy light. Izong, what did the divination say? A young girl wearing exquisite leather armor couldn't help but ask. The man sitting on the cushion looked away from the plate and raised his hand to point in a direction. Over there, the Yinjiao people are still in the forest. They haven't stopped. What are the Yinjiao people doing? The girl in leather armor sat down dejectedly and looked in the direction Izong was pointing. Zong's divination skills were among the best in the Yi family. No one doubted his results. Could it be that they were scared by us? They were so scared that they moved. Maybe they're looking for a new place to settle down. But those tribesmen like to hide in the forest, another young man in the carriage said. Thinking of the complicated terrain and dense forest, as well as the possibility of encountering all kinds of poisonous insects, ferocious beasts and even king beasts, they weren't stupid enough to kill their way into the forest. That was why they leaked the information from Zong's divination to other people who were interested. As long as the Yinjiao people dared to come out of the forest, they could directly kill them. It was best to let those people force the Yinjiao people to a remote place first. After the others had exhausted the Yinjiao forces, they could carry out the final cleanup. Fire crystals? Salt? Given the character of the Yinjiao people, they wouldn't give them away so easily. They would definitely keep them in their hands. At most, a small part of them would be taken away by those who chased after them first. Even if all the fire crystals and salt were taken away by those who chased after them first, they would only feel a little regret. After all, their main target this time was only the Yinjiao people. These people wanted to use the Yinjiao matter to gain merit. Since the fire seed disappeared, the cohesiveness of the tribes gradually weakened. There were scattered people. These people came from different tribes, and because of their interests or hobbies, they gathered together to form new forces. Among these forces, there were many who specialized in robbery or assassination. For example, the Green Peak, who were famous for robbing, or the Night Clan, who were famous for taking bribes to assassinate. Once these forces were attracted by a huge profit, they would become hungry wolves that smelled blood. They would pounce on the scent. Are the Yinjiao people really that scary? Someone asked. I know that. When that Yinjiao person sent the head of the Lu family flying with one blow, I was sitting in the tower at the city gate. At that time, the young man rattled on and on about what had happened. I heard that our ancestors had wanted to destroy the Yinjiao people for a long time. But the Yinjiao people were always hiding in the forest. Gradually we forgot about this tribe. Only every time the Yinjiao people cause trouble we remember. I heard that the Yinjiao people can control beast kings. Is that true? The girl in leather armor asked curiously. You believe that? Why not? Isn't that what everyone says? No, I have to call the head of the fox tribe over and ask him. The girl with the wallet pulled the curtain aside and gave some instructions to the people outside. Not long after, the chief of the fox tribe was brought over from the carriage behind. Once in the car, the head of the fox tribe felt uncomfortable. He used to be the head of the tribe, the boss. But now that he had come to the royal city, he felt inferior to these young people. After all, they were the best of the 6 noble families in the royal city. Greetings, young masters, the head of the fox tribe said, suppressing his discomfort. You're the head of the fox tribe? I heard that you were slaughtered by the Yinjiao people? The girl in leather armor asked. Veins popped on the head of the fox tribe. What did she mean by slaughtered by the Yinjiao people? Weren't the people who had been brought into the royal city human? Also, what was with that tone of disdain? Was she looking down on them? Clenching his fists, the head of the fox tribe suppressed his anger and sighed. The Yinjiao people are indeed dangerous. With that, the head of the fox tribe repeated what he had prepared. He left out the details of the beast so that it sounded as if the Yinjiao people could really control the beast. All right, you can go now. I got it. The girl in leather armor waved him away as if shooing away a fly. The head of the fox tribe took a deep breath and jumped out of the car. After the head of the fox tribe left, the girl's expression darkened. He's lying. I told you the Yinjiao people aren't as scary as the rumors say. They're just exaggerating in order to deal with them. As for what happened at the city gate, it must be some secret technique. That Shaoxian guy can't be that powerful. A young man leaned against the side with his arms crossed. Besides, so what if the head of the fox tribe is lying? As long as we get what we want. Flap, flap, flap. Outside the car there was the sound of flapping wings. The people inside perked up. They lifted the curtains and let in a striped bird. There was a thin roll of animal skin in its claws. Carefully, the bird unfurled the skin and read the words on it. After reading it, Zong said, "Don't count on Green Peak. They've leaked Yanjiao's general location to the Night Clan. Chapter 484. What's going on? Green Peak should have caught up with the Yanjiao by now. Aren't they supposed to be the fastest at tracking? Asked the girl in leather armor. Green Peak decided to postpone their pursuit, said Yizong. That was what the letter said. It wasn't that they couldn't catch up, but they were postponing their pursuit? The people of Green Peak were scared? The people of Green Peak had a special characteristic. If one of their tentacles was chopped off, they would retract all of their tentacles and watch quietly. So you're saying that Green Peak encountered something unexpected? Asked the young man next to him. What exactly was it that was out of his expectations? The people in the carriage couldn't imagine. Even Yizong couldn't get an answer through divination. We'll have to ask Green Peak in the future. In the forest. As they continued forward, the tribesmen were already far away from familiar places. Fortunately, Xiaoxian still remembered the place and drew a map from his memory for Zhengluo to refer to. If there wasn't anything special in this area, the tribesmen wouldn't come here. When Xiaoxian first met the Taihe people here, it was because they were chasing the long-clawed monkey. The journey that took Xiaoxian 2 days back then took the tribe almost 7 days to move. Fortunately, they got used to the rhythm of the journey and sped up a lot. We're almost at that mountain. Remember to prepare water, it'll get drier later, reminded Xiaoxian. After that, Xiaoxian sat on the side and took out a straw rope to perform divination. These days he would perform divination every day. After all, he had so many people with him and it was related to the entire tribe. He couldn't be careless. Even if he didn't get anything, he would still try. In the past, continuous divination would cause him to feel exhausted due to exhaustion. However, it was unknown whether it was because he had trained to control the power of the bone ornaments or some other reason. But now, divination was much easier. However, many things could not be predicted by divination. The tribesmen were already used to Xiaoxian doing this every day. In fact, every time Xiaoxian took out the rope, Zhang Luo and Duokong would gather around and wait. After Xiaoxian finished tying the knot, Zhang Luo asked, "What did you get this time?" "We have to be careful tonight," Xiaoxian said. Zhang Luo's expression changed. "Someone's coming tonight?" In the past few days they had also encountered other people. If it wasn't for Xiaoxian's frequent traps, they would have encountered even more people. However, there were very few pursuers that appeared at night. Zhang Luo got up and paced back and forth. "Let's find a place to settle the tribesmen first. Don't be too busy when the time comes." The dark environment at night was very restrictive for the Yanjiao people. Plus, if a fight broke out, others might get hurt. Why don't we speed up? We'll definitely reach that mountain before nightfall. I remember there's a place to hide there, Xiaoxian suggested. There weren't many mountains around and they were very short. There was no place to hide. Okay, that's it. The team got up and set off again. Along the way, Xiaoxian discussed countermeasures with Zheng Luo and the others. In the evening, the team reached the mountain. It was like a dividing line. On one side of the mountain, there were many moist rivers. On the other side, it was much drier. There were no caves on the mountain, but there were a few narrow crevices for the elderly, children, and women who hadn't awakened their totemic powers. These people who didn't have much fighting power could hide in there to prevent sneak attacks. The sun gradually disappeared and the sky darkened. Zhang Luo and the others stood on the mountain and looked down at the forests below. They should be here soon. Have you distributed the things? Everyone knows what to do, right? Xiaoxian asked the people standing behind him. Yes, the soldiers replied. Even if they didn't understand why Xiaoxian was doing this, they just had to do as he said. Zheng Luo stretched his shoulders and waved his arms to warm up. His eyes were cold as he looked at the forest at the foot of the mountain. All these years, the flaming horns rarely bullied others. Even when they fought, they followed the rules of the jungle. If they weren't forced into a corner, they wouldn't cause trouble. However, there were always people who liked to test their patience. Now they were being hunted by all sides. Weren't they just taking advantage of the situation to steal? Bah! Do they think we're easy to bully? We'll kill whoever comes. Those who fell into Zheng Luo's hands would have their necks broken without hesitation. Xiaoxian looked at the darkening sky. Let's go. Xiao Xian led the way down the mountain into the forest. Zheng Luo and the others followed closely behind. The forest at night was pitch black. There was almost no wind in the forest. It was so quiet that only the sounds of insects and strange birds could be heard. But soon spots of light lit up in the forest. Some insects were attracted by the light and flew over. Xiao Xian leaned against a tree and tossed a glowing crystal into the air. Suddenly, Xiao Xian's action of throwing the crystal stopped, and he looked at the forest not far away. "Since you're here, don't hide." He threw the glowing crystal in his hand, drawing a bright line in the air. Whoosh! There was the sound of a rope being swung. A dense barrage of sharpened wooden spikes shot out into the forest ahead. Although they had just arrived and Xiao Xian could only make simple things, this was enough. Whoosh! 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 Following the sound of wooden spikes hitting hard objects, black figures rushed out of the forest and headed straight for Xiao Xian. These people were wrapped in black cloth, only revealing their eyes. If one looked closely at their eyes during the day, they would notice that their eyes were different from others. Their eyes looked like those of nocturnal animals. Their pupils dilated as they rushed out. Even in a completely dark environment, they were not afraid because they could see. The totemic power in Xiao Xian's body was operating at its peak. His muscles, bones, and even his blood were filled with totemic power. His body's strength was greatly stimulated, like a sleeping beast that had awakened, revealing its fangs and claws. Xiao Xian's speed was too fast, and without the help of the glowing crystal, he was able to accurately meet the person in the lead. His sword was filled with murderous intent and an overbearing aura pressed down. Clang! The person who met Xiao Xian first had a bad premonition. His hair, which was wrapped in black cloth, stood on end. The sword in his hand hummed under the strong impact, as if it had been hit by a boulder. He wanted to throw the boulder away, but he found that the more strength he exerted, the greater the force on his arm. If it was only a boulder at the beginning, then in an instant the boulder had become a mountain. It was unshakable. They knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, but they did not expect it to be to this extent. In one exchange, the person in black at the front was sent flying. His arm was numb from the impact and he did not even have time to use his skills. A sword with a cold metallic aura struck down like a bolt of lightning in the night. Poof! The person who had just regained his footing had a deep cut from his neck to his waist. Blood spurted out and could be heard clearly in the quiet forest. At the same time that Xiao Xian rushed out, Zheng Luo and the others made their move. After one of their companions fell, these men in black were only slightly frightened. However, they still had confidence. They were the kings of the night, and the night was their favorite hunting environment. This was because their eyes were most suitable for darkness. Even if there was no light at all, they could still see each other's figures clearly within a certain range. So what if they were strong? How could a mere Yanjiao compete with them in terms of night movement? They were overestimating themselves. Who knew that just as they were about to collide with the Yanjiao, they heard a loud bang. A thick smoke with a pungent smell spread out. Not to mention how the smell irritated their noses, the smoke that spread out blocked their line of sight. At night, Yanjiao people's vision was limited, and their movements were severely restricted. They could only rely on their hearing and perception. In the past, when they couldn't see anything at night, the Flaming Horn tribesmen would rely on their hearing and sensitive senses. They wouldn't rely too much on their eyesight. Now that they couldn't see anything, they relied on their hearing and senses. Therefore, in terms of hearing and perception, they were still relatively strong. These people who planned a sneak attack at night did indeed have strong night vision. However, with the Taiha smoke bomb, they were all the same now. They could not see anything. Let's rely on our own abilities. These smoke bombs were given to them by the Taiha tribe before they left. They were placed in the same bag as the other herbs. The shaman had found them while rummaging through the herbs. These smoke bombs were a secret product of the Taiha tribe. It was said that the Taiha ancestors learned from wild beasts in the forest and finally perfected it. If they encountered a beast they could not defeat during a hunt, they would throw out these smoke bombs to escape. Although they could only confuse the beast for a moment, in a critical moment, 1 second of distraction could mean the difference between life and death. The Yanjiao people had asked the Taiha tribe for them many times, But they refused. They even asked for an exorbitant price. In the end, the Yinjiao people got angry and refused to buy. They would hunt with their own abilities. He didn't expect the Taiha tribe to give him 200 of these smoke bombs when he left this time. How generous of them. After all, these things were hard to make. Not everyone in the Taiha tribe had one, even for the Taiha tribe. They had not used these things before, but after Xiao Xian's divination predicted a possible sneak attack at night, he prepared them. Since the enemy chose to attack at night, it was very likely that they relied on their unique night vision. Xiao Xian had heard from the Black Bears in the royal city that there was a group of people who specialized in sneak attacks at night. They were called the Night Clan. After facing these people directly, Xiao Xian confirmed their identities. Taking a step back, even if they weren't from the Night Clan, and even if the smoke couldn't block the other party's line of sight, it would definitely have a disruptive effect. The smell would even stick to their bodies. As long as they didn't wash it, it would stay for a long time. Everyone could rely on their sense of smell to determine the other party's location. Chapter 485. If the Taiha tribesmen knew they were using something like this at night, they would be heartbroken. Ordinary people wouldn't think of using this at night, and the attackers obviously didn't expect to encounter such a situation. Therefore, just as they were feeling proud of their superior night vision, they were stunned by this sudden attack. The explosion of smoke enveloped the area. Before they could react, the Yinjiao people were already charging at them. The people who came with Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo were all people who cooperated well with each other. They could tell if it was their own people by the sound of their arms swinging. Xiao Xian heard a familiar cracking sound and raised an eyebrow. It was the sound of Zheng Luo crushing someone's arm. Xiao Xian had seen similar things happen before. Although the Yinjiao tribesmen and the night tribesmen in black couldn't see through the smoke, it was different for Xiao Xian. He was able to see everyone present through the smoke. Clang! Crack! The back of Duo Kang's axe smashed into a man in black. A piece of metal armor on his chest caved in, followed by the crisp sound of bones breaking. It wasn't the blade of the axe that broke it, it was the back of the axe that broke it. This was the first time the night tribesmen faced the warriors of the Flaming Horn tribe, and it was also an unforgettable experience. Only when they fought could they experience the ferocious beast's strength and ferocious attacks. The night tribesmen felt like they weren't facing humans, but ferocious beasts that suddenly jumped out of the forest. Retreat! One of them shouted. In terms of strength, they were no match for these Yinjiao tribesmen. Moreover, under such brute force, many of their techniques would be delayed for a moment, because they needed time to recover from the numbness in their muscles. What's more, the smoke also obstructed their vision. Their advantage was their night vision. Not fighting blindly with these barbarians here. Even worse, under the same blind situation, these Yinjiao barbarians reacted faster than them. He could only retreat for now. They retreated, but not directly. Instead, they retreated from the area covered in smoke. The smoke that they threw out couldn't possibly cover the entire forest. It only covered a small area. They'd be stupid to stay here and continue fighting with the Yinjiao. As soon as the men in black came out of the smoke-shrouded area, a rain of arrows shot towards them. Those who were fast enough dodged the arrows and ran away. Those who were a little slower were shot and injured. Xiao Xian rushed over and finished them off. None of these arrows entered the smoke-shrouded area because there were many Yinjiao players inside. They followed Xiao Xian's plan and did not leave to pursue the men in black for the time being. Instead, they waited until the last volley of arrows had been fired and received Xiao Xian's signal to leave. Not every Yinjiao player who rushed out was hiding in the smoke-shrouded area. Apart from a few Yinjiao players who were still hiding in the forest, Xiao Xian was the only one who was exposed. Most of the men in black who had been injured by the arrows had been Xiao Xian's last hits. Not far from the bushes, there were two men staring at Xiao Xian. They drew their bows and narrowed their eyes, locking onto Xiao Xian. Only they had the eyesight to aim at a target in the dark of night. Bang! There was the faint sound of a bowstring vibrating. The metal arrow had spun and flew at high speed towards Xiao Xian's direction. It was aimed at Xiao Xian's heart. Xiao Xian's eyes twitched. With a flick of his wrist, his sword swayed and blocked in front of him. Clang! The arrow had struck the sword with a crisp sound that made people's hearts tremble. With the arrow blocked, Xiao Xian looked towards the bushes. There really were archers. Xiao Xian activated the totemic power in his body. The totemic patterns on his body were blocked by the grass and mud. He carefully sensed every change in the air around him. His ears caught every slight sound, felt the movement of the grass in the wind, and even the heartbeat of the enemy who was holding their breath. Xiao Xian could sense the presence of anyone within a radius of 10 meters. There was another person nearby. He could smell a suspicious scent and hear the other person's breathing. Even though the other person was trying his best to hide his presence, Xiao Xian could still sense his specific location. Without relying on his night vision, Xiao Xian could even sense the other person's grip on the hilt of his sword. This was the sensory ability he had developed after hunting for a long time, even at night. When Xiao Xian looked towards the bushes, the two archers hiding behind the bushes suddenly had a strange feeling. It was as if the other person could see through the cover of the night and the leaves to see where they were. Every movement they made, even every detail of their fingers on the bowstring, could be seen by the other person. Under this strange feeling, the two archers looked at each other. What should we do? Move to another place? One of the archers signaled silently with his eyes. The other archer looked towards Xiao Xian. Coincidentally, Xiao Xian was walking towards them. The strange feeling in his heart grew even stronger. Under this strange feeling, the person drew an arrow and shot it. His movements were smooth and fluid. From drawing the arrow to shooting, it only took an instant. Before the enemy shot the arrow, Xiao Xian had already moved. He quickly ran towards the direction of the arrow. His body was like a swift leopard as he rushed straight over. Then he suddenly bent his knees and bounced up. His feet left the ground, and when his body leaped up, the sword in the air collided with the arrow that was shot towards him. Clang! The arrow was shaken off. Xiao Xian hooked onto a branch and nimbly flipped over. Before landing, his other hand caught the arrow that was shaken off, hit the branch and bounced back and threw it out. There was a muffled groan. One of the two archers hiding behind the bushes was pierced by the arrow. Blood flowed out from where the arrow had pierced through. The injured man wanted to stand up and run away, but as soon as he moved, he felt a sharp pain in his body. He looked down at his chest and saw that there was an animal bone armor protecting his heart. The arrow did not penetrate this animal bone armor. To be precise, the arrow did not touch this animal bone armor. Instead, it grazed the edge of the armor. If it had been slightly off course, it would have hit the armor. Coincidence? Or the injured archer's eyes were filled with confusion and surprise. Despair rose in his heart. At the same time, a thought appeared in his mind. He was so shocked that large drops of sweat appeared on his forehead. His body could not support itself. He fell to the ground and groaned in pain. The arrows they shot were smeared with poison. As long as one was injured by the arrowhead, the poison would quickly spread through the body. But when they smeared the poison on their arrows, they did not expect that the arrows they shot would be used on their own people. The archer in black looked in Xiao Xian's direction again. He saw Xiao Xian's figure getting closer and closer. His whole body trembled violently. It was not clear whether it was because of the pain or because of the shock of his guess. Before he lost consciousness, he roared. "He can see us!" The other archer wanted to run, but Xiao Xian's sword had already come down. The people hiding in other places were shocked. They had all heard the roars of their own people. "He can see us? How is that possible? Aren't they Yinjiao people?" They had never heard of Yinjiao people being able to see at night. If that was really the case, then it was beyond their expectations. How is that possible? How is that possible? The archer hiding behind a tree not far from Xiao Xian felt his heart beat wildly. If the other party could see at night, then what advantage would they have? Just as he was about to run, he suddenly heard a rustling sound behind him. It sounded like the wind blowing through tree branches. His heart trembled. He turned around and slashed. Clang! Xiao Xian held the sword in his hand. The air around the blade was mixed with the smell of blood. It pressed down from above like the claws of a giant beast, mercilessly stomping down. The archer who took the blow felt pain worse than if he had been chopped by a knife or an axe. His bones felt like they were about to fall apart, and his legs almost gave way. His face, which had been full of murderous intent, was now contorted by the pain that spread from his wrist to his arm. But it was night, and his face was covered with a black cloth, so no one could see his expression. The sound of the blades clashing against each other was enough to make people feel as if they were in ice. Their eardrums trembled, their hair stood on end, and their muscles trembled. The sword edge drew a sickle-like arc pucci. Blood spurted out. Xiao Xian didn't look at the fallen archer. He bent his little finger and blew into it. This was a signal to the people in the smoke, as well as the Yanjiao warriors hiding in other places, that they could start hunting. Even at night, even though this was a place they had never been to before, they could still clearly distinguish the scents of the various creatures in the forest, as well as the people hiding in the bushes, behind the tree trunks and on the branches. Xiao Xian continued to look for the archers in hiding, to prevent them from shooting in the dark. The night was still long. When the first rays of Yangguang shone on the forest in the early morning, the team on the mountain was ready to set off. In addition to those in the forest, the mountain had also been attacked, but there were relatively few sneak attacks on the mountain. The sacrifice warriors had been cremated, and the fire used was the fire of the kindling that the shaman had summoned by building a temporary fire pit. As long as the people were there, the kindling would be there. The shaman had once said that the souls of the dead would return to the kindling. The people of the tribe often said that their ancestors and other deceased people were with them. The souls were there and there was no sorrow. As long as there were people alive, the kindling would continue to be passed on. After crossing the mountain, they arrived at the dry grassland. Xiao Xian also met the people on horseback that he had seen before, but Xiao Xian didn't say much to them. Those people looked at the Yanjiao tribe with guarded eyes. After all, anyone who saw a migrating team would be on guard. Seeing that the Yanjiao team had no intention of staying, those people let out a long sigh of relief. Who were those people that just passed by? I don't know, they didn't look easy to get along with. Who cares, as long as they don't settle in our territory it's fine. Don't try to steal our territory. But such a large tribe and they don't look weak, why would they migrate? This was a remote area, and news was delayed for a long time. They weren't well informed at all, so they didn't know about the Yanjiao team. So when they saw the Yanjiao team, they were just curious about where they were going. After all, there was fertile land and plenty of prey, which was the opposite direction of where the team was going. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.